As I passed a low pavilion where a crowd of helpless lunatics were confined, I read a motto on the wall: "While I live, I hope." The absurdity of it struck me forcibly. I would have liked to put above the gates that open to the asylum, "He who enters here leaveth hope behind." Nellie Bly, 10 Days in a Madhouse.
Through me you go into a city of weeping. Through me you go into eternal pain. Through me you go amongst the lost people. Eternal and eternal I endure. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. Dante Alighieri, The Inferno. Hello and welcome back to Pennhurst Part 2. I'm Shanna, your hostess with the mostest.
I'm PJ.
I'm Laura.
I'm Ray.
Hi, I'm Dan.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. How are you?
I'm bored. Hi, Laura. How are you?
Okay.
I'm good.
Oh, that's wonderful. How about you, Ray?
I'm spiffy.
Ooh.
Hi.
I didn't talk to you.
Hi.
Hi, PJ.
Hi.
Hi.
All right. So anyway, this week we're going to pick right up with Pennhurst. Last time when we were here, we discussed all the nitty gritty. We discussed, what Pennhurst was and what asylums were in general in that time period. We also discussed what was happening behind closed doors at Pennhurst. And we had touched base on the court cases that had come, but I said we're going to hold off on that because we're going to discuss the expose instead. Because the expose comes out in the 60s, and then it takes a good 8 years before some real court cases are brought in front of the jury. And then from there, it takes another 10 years plus to actually enact some really big change. So today we're going to focus on the court cases, and then we're going to talk about the ghosts that are there and our opinions on whether it's haunted and the Pennhurst Haunted House Asylum Tour. That's all I got.
Not a fan.
No, I'm not a fan. I refuse.
So that was actually the sound of her getting up. She's just making old woman noises now.
It's me annoyed.
Sounds a lot like me getting up or sitting down.
All right, I'm going to go. So how are you guys all feeling after last week?
Disturbed, I would say.
Depressed.
Glad I could be here.
Yeah, thanks.
This is just me in my natural habitat. I'm fine.
Unrelated to last week's episode, I feel great because Games Overboard had a great episode.
Yes, it did. It was fantastic.
Yes, it was. Quite. So anyway, let's go back into the depressing. So
Your mood is too happy. We must be depressed.
Gotta bring
let's
it down.
bring that back down. So we purposefully used the quotes from Nellie Bly's nonfiction, where she was in a madhouse when she made that kind of comparison to Dante's writing. So I read the original Dante's Inferno because I think it's just so telling of what life was like in Pennhurst. We heard the stories last time. And if you've ever read Dante's Inferno with all the circles of hell, a lot of the stuff that you saw happening there is in the Inferno. Like there is a section where you're rolling in your own feces and stuff, right? And you're choking on it too. So a lot of it is very similar to the Dante's Inferno. The first part, I should say, because it's a 3-part series. So there are 3 major court cases that come because of Pennhurst. Before the Halderman case, which Dan and Ray know a lot about from our research, there actually was the right to education lawsuit in 1971. Fun fact, and I use fun sarcastically, 3 of our most major lawsuits for education and for the rights of disabled came from Pennsylvania because the terrible things we were doing here. So,
well, we are the Keystone State, guys.
Yeah, we hold it all together. And it's just interesting because my PhD is in ethical leadership. And so one of my first classes as I headed into this PhD program, and it was in the master's program too, was looking at these court cases that kind of changed the world. And I was like, yeah, I live up here, y'all, because y'all are from Florida. Like, I've lived through this. So the first one was the right to education law in 1971. Then there was the Halderman versus Pennhurst State School, which, of course, eventually shuts the place down, which we know a lot about because you guys had quoted it, Ray and Laura, last week about the one girl who had fallen and hurt herself. She is the main reason why that happened, Terry Lee Halderman. And then finally, there was Youngberg versus Romeo in 1982. So there are 3 major court cases. And all of these eventually are going to have some kind of positive repercussion on the educational field. And just before I even go into these 3 court cases, I want to paint a little picture of last week. Okay. Now, I'm not going to say where this comment was made and who made it. Okay. But there was a comment that was made to me as I was discussing, because it was after Tuesday. And I said, oh, yeah, we just did a really great recording on Pennhurst Part 1. And we were discussing the lack of rights for the disabled in the 60s and 70s. And I said, from that, from Pennhurst shutting down, lots of great things came. And the person said, well, everyone was just whining a whole bunch about that. That was ridiculous. It was all overblown. Pennhurst, places like Pennhurst need to be open because where are these kids going to go? And I looked at the person and I said, don't you have a younger sister who is disabled? Well, of course. Well, where does she go? To school. And I know what school this person goes to. And I said, okay, so you're letting her go to public school. Yeah. And she's in a life skills class. Yeah. Well, if it wasn't for Pennhurst having litigation, there would be no option for your sister to go to public school. Well, that's my taxes paid for. Yeah, they do now.
Yeah.
It didn't
now they do.
That's the right to education, which came out right after the Pennhurst saga, which of course leads into things like, IDEA in the future. And so that kind of shut that person down. And so I think while this podcast is supposed to be about scary things, I feel like we are going to learn a lot here too. Like, don't just assume that you know more than we do, first off. And number 2, you have to have things like this happen so positive things can come out of it.
Can I just say, I think real people can be real scary. So I think it still counts.
Yeah, it does. All right. So did you guys do any research? Have you heard of right to education? And I'm putting y'all on the spot here. PJ does, but you guys don't really have education backgrounds.
I mean, like I've heard of it in passing.
So this was the lawsuit that came from PARC. PARC stood for, obviously they've changed it since then, Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Children. And as we mentioned in last week's podcast, words like retarded, moron, imbecile, they're going to be used in this podcast because of the time period. Remember, those were official diagnoses, as PJ mentioned. So PARC actually sued the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania because they were sick and tired of just all of the issues going against the disabled. They weren't able to get true education. So I'm going to start with that one, and then we'll go into Halderman. Is that good? I have my court case filings here.
Oh, look at that.
I'm prepared, Dan. All right.
If you'll look at Exhibit A.
If you look at Exhibit 5 for me. Anyway, so I have here actual sections out of the court case itself. And so they actually brought a whole bunch of lawsuits against the Commonwealth. There were 4 major statutes that they were saying were excluding retarded children from education. And again, I'm using that term because it's coming out of the text. So legally speaking, you're supposed to, every child from like 6 to 21 is supposed to have education. Every kid should be in school from the age of 8 to 17. If you didn't know that, that's a legal precedent in Pennsylvania. But I'm going to read from here. It says, any persons between the ages of 6 and 21 whom the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, through its local school districts and intermediate units, is presently excluding from a program of education and training in the public schools, that would be the mentally retarded. So they were purposely excluding them because they could. And so they said that the exclusions of retarded children complained of are based upon 4 state statutes, one which relieves the State Board of Education from any obligation to educate a child whom a public school psychologist certifies as uneducable and untrainable. The burden of caring for such a child then shifts to the Department of Welfare. So isn't it interesting that the State Board of Education says it has no obligation to teach children who have mental disabilities? That was the precedent until 1971. And if they're deemed by a psychologist that they're uneducable, it goes to the Department of Welfare. Guess what? Department of Welfare is under legally no obligation to provide any educational services for the child. So Pennhurst technically wasn't breaking any laws. Because if it's Department of Welfare, if they were following that department, they're under no obligation. Another statute allows an indefinite postponement of admission to public school of any child who has not attained a mental age of 5 years. So if you can't pass your IQ test at a certain percentage, well, now I don't teach you because your IQ is too low. You're uneducable. Another statute appears to excuse any child from compulsory school attendance whom a psychologist finds unable to profit therefrom. And one last defines compulsory school age as 8 to 17 years, but has been used in practice to postpone admissions of retarded children until age 8 or to eliminate them from public schools at age 17. So they kick you out. So Park goes in front of the Commonwealth and basically sues them, and they say, like, this is inappropriate. All children are supposed to have appropriate education. And you're saying these kids aren't trainable, but they can learn something. And to go back to last week's discussion, a lot of the people that they interviewed, their former residents, they missed being there because they had jobs there. So how do you feel about the idea that if you're disabled, you don't deserve an education?
Well, I think we've proven as a society time and time again that that's complete bollocks.
Yep.
Yeah, how do you like that one, British? No,
Whoa, watch your language.
well, at least I didn't say the
I'm
other B word.
Bollocks is okay. Bloody's bad, right?
That's right. It's bloody. That's the bad one.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't really say bullocks a whole lot either.
No, I mean it's balls.
Didn't you use the
That's what
word
it means.
bloody before in front of your dad and he smacked you?
Oh yeah, I got yelled at for that.
There you go. Yeah. That's what I thought.
Oh yeah.
Okay, back to the story at hand. No, we see it every day, even still, that you have people that have a mental disability that's working just fine. They might need a little more guidance. Maybe you have to tell them a few times to do it, but they'll do it. My mother's aunt was disabled, and she was able to hold her own. She could hold down a job. She could hold down an apartment. No problem. I'm sure she would have been admitted to that, no problem, Pennhurst, if the family ever decided to put her in there. So it's not about, for this, it's not about willing to, if they're willing to learn, it's about if somebody is willing to actually sit down and take the time with them.
I think that's the problem, is that
Well, that's
there was a status quo and no one wanted to upset it,
right,
Like,
and that's actually something that gets handled in the Halderman case. They bring up that. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but they bring up something close to that as well.
Well, they do. Because that one came after this one. Yeah. And so this had the precedence then for Halderman to make their class action lawsuit.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's sad. I don't know if it's entirely surprising. I mean, taking into consideration the history of history.
Yeah.
I mean,
just the history of the disabled in any way, shape, or form.
Yes.
Somebody
there's
that was
precedence for this sort of mentality.
Oh yeah, and it's not just a mental disability. It's somebody that was
it's
once
anything
perfectly
that's...
fine and they get disabled because of an accident at
Yes.
work. Even before this, suddenly you're useless to society.
Well, it's anything to be perceived as less than.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah,
Right.
and when it comes to like making a change, anytime there's like extra work involved to change, it's like, I want to do, like, is there a way we just cannot do this?
Right.
And like I've been doing just fine all this time without having this change. Like,
I
do we
don't hear
need
them
to change?
complaining.
Yeah.
Well, see that's the word that you hit upon. It's change.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that we as a society don't take too kindly to.
Yeah. Well, it's the problem of like state funds,
Oh yeah.
taxes.
Yep.
Hence that whole conversation. I'm like, well, your taxes are going there now.
Yeah.
They're going somewhere else before, and it really didn't work well. But, you mentioned a lot of things like, teaching them self-sufficiency. There are ways to make them have a good habitation. That's the proper term we use. But in the actual lawsuit, they said, despite the evidence and despite the fact that Pennsylvania provides an education to most children, the state's 1965 Pennsylvania Mental Retardation Plan estimates that while 46,000 school-age retarded children were enrolled in public schools, another 70 to 80,000 retarded children between the ages of 5 and 21 were denied access to any public education, services in schools, home or daycare, or other community facilities, or even state residential institutions. So you had a fraction of those kids somewhere, a mere fraction. And what's even more horrifying is later in it, they mentioned fewer than 2% of the residents of Pennsylvania state schools leave by rolls each year, and half of those by death rather than by discharge. So again, we have no number. It's unknown how many people died at Pennhurst. But if you have less than 1% of your kids graduating or leaving these places, and most of it's by death, obviously you have a problem. So once Park brought this against the state, there is no way Pennsylvania could win because it's just showcasing. They're like, well, look at this recent expose done by Bill Baldini. Mm-hmm. This is just one of your schools, right? So obviously the state lost. And so lots of changes came, but they're all major. At the end of it, and I don't want to bore you anymore with the readings, because for people like me and Pete, are like, oh, this is fun to read, because this is like the basis of our education. But initially, EHA is signed. EHA stands for Education for All Handicapped Children Act, which we mostly call Public Law 94-142. That was the precursor to IDEA. And so from there, President Gerald Ford actually signed that into law in 1975. And so from there, we get the idea of FAPE. And FAPE stands for Free and Appropriate Public Education. So everyone deserves public education. If you're paying your taxes, they go to your school. And if they reside in your area of school, they go to that school. And that school is in charge of them. That's why we get state and local funding for that. And so, of course, 1990, it becomes IDEA because they add new things like autism and traumatic brain injury as categories. They focus on transition services. So we have to help make sure the kids get jobs when they leave high school, right? Which is necessary. And it's the groundwork for gifted education, which is where I fall, because my students deserve a free and appropriate public education as well. They're being held back in class. They need to work ahead. They need to accelerate. So for me, that is a really important landmark case. Again, happens here in Pennsylvania, like many of the other ones. How do you feel about Park and all this? I mean, Park itself, the name of it's terrible. So I'm glad that they have changed from PARK to something else.
It's not like it's terrible now, but at the time, like it was
what, progressive?
It was just I'm just talking about the name. Like it was just a medical diagnosis,
Right.
Like,
it was scientific for the time.
Yeah. So while like saying the word now is an issue, like I have no issue with the way it was called then because it was literally just what it was called. Yeah. So, we, like you said, we used retardation in our paperwork up until just a few years ago.
Yeah.
So I'm sure I could go back in my files and find some of my current students with that with that label in their old files. That designation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a quote that I'm very fond of, and we talk about it a lot at work, especially related to DEI-related work. But it's that old phrase, when you know better, do better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And, and I think a lot of times people look at these things as super negative rather than this is a fact. And we have evolved in a positive way. Mm-hmm. And, and that's part of why these stories are important, is to teach us about the things that we don't want to do, that we want to actively, as a society, move away from and improve upon. So, I think that, even right now, as a society, there are things that we're in flux about, and people might even feel like they're being shamed, or they might feel ashamed. And that's okay. It's just an evolution. It's a shedding of an old skin and going into something new. Mm-hmm.
Well, and to build off of our previous discussion of the uncanny valley, right? I feel like you can't help the way that you're born. I can't help that I have my hair color or my eye color. I can't help that my face looks like my mama's. It is what it is. So to think that someone's less than or deserves less than you or someone else because they have a mental handicap or they have a physical disability, that's just completely inappropriate. So we need to reassess where our uncanny valley is and become more empathetic. If it wasn't for that expose, the empathy toward special needs people, I don't think would be where it was then. It was so prescient in the early 1970s then because of that landmark expose. And so I feel like because of that, there was an impetus to get all of these laws passed and to do some good old suing the American way to get the things that we needed. But it's just, it's so stark to me that while there was that impetus to really push, it took another almost 2 decades to get everything fully pushed through. Mm-hmm. And that just shows how slow it is for us to kind of curtail our thoughts. And then in the year 2023, have a conversation that shouldn't have happened. And like I mentioned last week, we're going right back to these institutions. It was mentioned in the Pennhurst movie.
Yeah. I mean, it seems likely that these institutions will be coming back, but hopefully we'll have learned some lessons and they will not come back in this repeated form.
Well, and you mentioned that one quote, but the another one I love is those who don't learn history are doomed to repeat it.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
hopefully everyone downloads this 2-part series and they learn more about these institutions and they say, no, I won't have this anymore. All right, so next one, then, after the landmark case of right to education, which sets the precedence for PJ's current degree, actually,
Yep.
is the Halderman versus Pennhurst State School. And I know that you guys did a lot of research on that. So if you want to take it away, you go ahead.
Yeah, so this started off in May 30th of 1974. It was a 32-day trial. It was, like we said before, it was a class action lawsuit, which was for the residents of Pennhurst against the institution, its superintendents, and the state officials. So
Yeah, it was a pretty big one.
It was going. They were going after everybody they could on this one. The judge found that they were in violation of the First, 8th, 9th, and 14th Amendment rights of all the individuals that had been institutionalized in this place, which it's one thing to go against one, but you're going up against multiples. You're not going to have a good time, especially if your last court case went down in flames. This court case is going to sink you bad.
Yeah.
And it did. It really, really did. Among other things, so the judge ruled that it was against the right to habilitation, the right to be free from harm, and the right to non-discriminatory habilitation. So you really have a lot going against you just on, not only do you have all the amendments, but now you've got these three really, really particular barbs that they're really hitting these people with.
Indisputable ones, too.
Exactly.
Well, you say that until it goes to appeal.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
Well, that's the thing. It goes into appeal, and then it holds everything up for another almost 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
The judge of this particular case, was U.S. Court Judge Raymond J. Broderick, and he had found that Pennhurst was overcrowded, understaffed, and lacked the programs needed for adequate habilitation. So
the word adequate too, like just
Yeah,
adequate, just decent.
when someone when someone tells you that you're not adequate, that really cuts you to the bone, because you're like, I'm not even average. I suck all around. So with that whole adequate and the fact that they were understaffed, and he even noticed, you guys are completely understaffed, that's what, in his mind, they used the unwarranted restraints.
You know what really gets me? Just the excerpts and just like the stories and what's happened to people. Even like Terry Lee Halderman, and just hearing about the injuries that she sustained. 40 injuries.
I think why this was such a great, why he ruled after 30 days in the plaintiff's favor is because of the stories.
The stories.
Oh, yeah.
But Stan was saying, so we're going to get to all the stories. I figured like you got that in the bag. But he said the physical environment was found to be hazardous to the residents, both physically and psychologically, because they were using seclusion rooms, as Dan, you mentioned, that physical restraints and psychotropic drugs. Remember, it was a drug capital.
Yeah.
So he said it was not conducive to learning new skills, and it was so poor that it contributes to losing skills already learned. So if you send anyone there with any education, they lost it all because of what they were experiencing.
Right.
So I found him to be such a great judge. He said yes to all of this. He said absolutely to the 14th and 8th Amendments, especially. You are breaking the law. So Ray, you mentioned there are lots of stories though.
And I think that's really what affects me the most as we review some of the research. Even like I was trying to say, like Terry Lee Halderman and her experiences. You hear like 40 injuries. You hear like she doesn't speak afterwards. And the trauma that implies, things that have been done to people, whether it's through drugs, whether it's through violence, it's uncanny and it's sick and it's inhumane. What's done to residents, what's the examples of abuse. And the hard thing to really fathom is, and we mentioned this, in the first session, as it were, was that this happened to children.
Yes.
Yeah.
We cannot forget that these are kids too.
To piggyback on what you were saying, what Judge Broderick said, which again, it goes back to that key word adequate, is he says that all of these things were used in lieu of adequate staffing.
Yeah.
So you have to wonder, it wasn't them trying to do what they thought was best. It was them doing what, screw it, we got to do this because we don't have enough people.
Or so was there a lack of funding, or was there the ability to get more staff and they did not? That
See,
I have
don't
questions.
know.
Yeah, I have
don't
questions.
know because what were we saying that the staff were pulling down, especially the
Well, we know that
higher-ranking?
80% of their money went to paying the staff.
Right. And if you're getting government funding, especially at a place that's supposed to be making getting millions of dollars, come on, this is the 50s, 60s, 70s. Your minimum wage isn't that much, but then again, everything, inflation isn't going to be huge.
Well, I mean, I will say that, Ray and I have both worked as business consultants, and the main expense for any organization is typically payroll.
Healthcare? Oh.
It's typically
What's healthcare?
payroll, but I don't know if that's true for healthcare specifically, because you would think that the healthcare would actually cost more than the payroll, but I don't know.
And then you wonder, this place, as we mentioned too, was meant to be self-sufficient. I mean,
Right.
as Ray mentioned, they even had the railroad coming through there.
That's right.
So there should have been an offset of costs because they were growing their own food. They had their own
such
density.
an
right.
infrastructure.
Is what, 6,000 acres?
633.
600. 600. That sounds better.
Over 600, yeah.
Those 600 acres, and they, didn't have these resources, or didn't
Right.
make these resources, and a reality.
And regardless, to go back, because I know, Ray, you're going to go over, I know you have some stuff circled there on that one paper on your right.
I do.
Yes.
I'm sorry if
There
I stole your
is-
thunder.
With,
It's all right.
with those stories.
It's our thunder, Dan.
It's happening to children, and they're there for years suffering at this place. So they go from
Right.
children to adulthood. They get used to this mess, which is just horrifying. To me, there's no justification how much you're getting paid. Like, hire extra staff. I think last time we had mentioned there's like a $4 million pitfall, and they only had so many nurses and doctors on staff and teachers. Hire more. Tell a state you need to hire more. I don't understand. It's that simple.
Right, but at the same time, if you're looking at from that way in a business state, what is the minimum that they can get away with?
I know.
If it's something
Yeah.
that's not being regulated, that's not being looked into hard enough,
Well, and
then-
this is why there's auditors for schools now.
right, then you're going to get away with what would be your basic needs for this.
I think in the state of Pennsylvania, one special ed teacher can have 65 kids on their roster, right?
Yes, unless you have your own resource room, then it's only like 25 or something like that. But
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? 65 kids. Tell me how you're supposed to adequately help them. Adequately.
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 See, that's our key word for the night, ladies and gentlemen. Can you say adequate?
So we still have some ways to go. But Ray, what were some of the stories that
What's
they
a variation on a theme? I mean, violence, abuse.
Wait, what was there
restraints?
more violence and abuse?
Yes, yeah.
thought so.
I
I'm sorry,
I
think I missed
definitely
that. Violence and what?
injury,
Oh,
violence, injury, abuse. I feel like
we shouldn't joke about this.
But
but-
even in
it's not funny,
No,
but
it's
like,
like
but what
sarcastic,
else are you
broken
gonna
humor.
do?
It's
Like,
dark
or how
humor.
else can you react to something
Right.
that is so
Yeah.
unfathomable?
I was going to say demeaning in your soul. But,
Well, yeah, that too.
We need some dark humor to get through this,
It's
you know.
coping.
Well,
That's
I
all
know
I-
it is a
coping.
coping.
That's all I
mechanism.
am is dark humor anymore, guys. You know this.
Oh, Dan.
But yeah, there's even
Anyway.
the story
what-
from Suffer the Little Children early in the expose where there's this kid who used to be really chatty. They sent him to the Quaker building for a while, and he came back and just wouldn't talk anymore because of the things that happened in the Quaker building.
Those darn Quakers.
Yeah, ironically, it was the most violent building
I know
in
that.
the whole
Well, I think I
place.
said that last
Last
week.
time,
too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And how we react to something like this, I couldn't help but recently I reread, and you'll have to help me with the pronunciation, Night by Elie Wiesel.
Elie Wiesel.
Elie Wiesel. And if you read through it, of course I don't know if everybody has read it, but it's almost like a memoir. Everybody should, of his experience in a concentration camp. So, ergo, during the Holocaust. And it's so like this unfathomable. But at the same time, if you kind of listen to how he relays the story, I don't want to call it an outright levity in his approach, but there is there is a wit, there is a sarcasm.
Yeah.
And I
Right.
think sometimes you can't help, especially if you've gone through something like that, to leverage off of that mentality, that frame, so to speak, to get through it, you know? And when we read this, and I didn't even
Yeah, if you don't laugh, you
experience
cry,
it, and I didn't even experience it, but it's not necessarily that I think I want to make light of it or that any of us mean to make light of it. It's just that this is how we cope with hearing about such tragedy.
Well, if you know anyone who works in the emergency response field, whether it's 911 operators, doctors, nurses, they always have the most morbid sense of humor because you need it.
Yeah.
You know, you really do. And that's the kind of thing like we need to get through these episodes here. It's something to like bring, to bring our spirits up and to like mentally deal with it.
Right. Or else how else do you?
Yeah.
You know? Do you know what else I was thinking? I'm sorry, this might be a little bit of a tangent, but throughout researching this and just kind of reflecting on everything that's gone on, everything from how could this happen in our own backyard? Because really, we're from Pennsylvania. We live just a couple of hours. It's like,
Yeah, Philly's what, an hour and a half, 2 hours tops?
Yeah, 2 hours tops. I keep doing that.
You just talk with your hands, you get.
I know.
You're into it.
2 hours with traffic.
2 hours of traffic, but you know what? Like if I leave early enough, I can be from our driveway to Philadelphia, like Center City, Philadelphia, in under 2 hours.
Oh yeah.
It's really not that. And I couldn't help but think, like, how could this happen? Why did it take so long? Because if you take into consideration the fact that this place was built in the early 20th century, right? And the whistle wasn't blown, so to speak, until like the mid-60s, right? Wow, what happened? And then I thought to myself, it's like, well, what else happened during that time period? And the gears start turning, and it's like the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, the Vietnam War, stuff that happened. The Cold War. Stuff that happened, 5 to 10 years prior to this, 5 to 10 years, after this. And I think when society is focused or it's brought to light that there is injustice, even if the injustice is in some other sort of situation, whether it's racism or whether it's sexism, fill in the variable, that you start to see it, in other areas, in other places. So when I think to myself, like, why did it take this long? Part of me also thinks it had to take this long, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, we as a country weren't
we
ready.
were not sophisticated. Maybe that's the wrong word. Not sophisticated. We weren't enlightened enough, maybe?
Yeah.
Right. Think of it like when you get a new car and you go, yeah, I got this awesome car. And you go, wait a minute, they have that car too. Hey, they have that car too. They have that car too. Everybody has the same car as you because you're seeing it. You know what it looks like. And yeah, that's exactly what you're saying. With everything, we're seeing all of these other atrocities go around, and now we're finally seeing it in the backyard.
Or I think about like Laura's prior quote or saying, at where she works, where it's like, when you know better, do better. And we didn't know better until we saw, until other things were unraveling.
But the worst part is we didn't do better initially. We fought to do better.
No, we didn't.
Which is so upsetting. It's like the state appeals this case. So to move forward a little bit, you mentioned that Broderick, is like, this is disgusting. How dare you? He was very inflammatory towards Pennhurst.
Well, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. He was a little upset.
Just a little.
So then it gets appealed for a decade. And as it goes to the Court of Appeals, there are changes that happen, and it gets knocked back and knocked back and knocked back.
Oh, yeah, and the amount of docket entries on this is ridiculous. 2,192 different docket entries.
Yeah, so at the end, he says, because he was actually really upset when it goes through all the appeals, in an opinion in 1985, about halfway through the proceedings, he said, "No one anticipated that this civil action commenced on May 30th, 1974, would be actively litigated for more than 10 years, requiring 2,192 docket entries, about 500 court orders, 28 published opinions, and 3 arguments before the U.S. Supreme Court." Isn't it embarrassing that it took us, we did all that to stop this from like, I don't understand. Like, don't you want to stop Pennhurst? Don't you want to like, maybe it's my ethics coming through, and I apologize to be preachy, but why are we fighting something when we know that it's wrong? Is it just cost, or do you really think that they're less than you? My brain.
I hate to say it, but the other thing that we have to bear in mind, that you're talking about, like all of these children and people who are living there. I mean, over 2,000 of them. They all had families who left them there.
No.
And did not come back and did not care and did not fight for them. And that is maybe the more disturbing thing, because you're talking about the administration and the workers, which is true. And it is kind of like, how can you do that every day? But we are ignoring these families who...
Right. But how many of them do you think thought that they were doing the right thing and making them go to a better place?
Well, sure.
Yeah, it was all about just the culture of the time,
right,
for a lot of it.
How many people do you think, if they knew that these atrocities were going to happen, they would have let that happen to their relatives?
Well,
I'm sure there are a
there
bunch.
are tons of stories
I'm
of
sure
people
there are a
who
bunch of
drop
people
their
who
kid
do that.
off and come back a month later and they're bruised and cut and no longer speaking and all of these things. And it doesn't say they take them home.
No.
Yeah,
Right.
No.
But how
you're
many
right.
of them were actually allowed to take them home? Because some of these places wouldn't allow you to take
Well,
them
they
home
were
because...
involuntarily.
There was one story I read of a boy who was so drugged he didn't recognize his mother. I mean, but that's the thing. Like, if I'm
What does
that
he
kid's
have?
mother, I could look for that story again.
Because sometimes I'd like to be like that.
I don't know if it said. I don't think that it did say, but I'll look.
I'm telling.
You're telling on my mom?
Yep.
We
Oh my
love
God,
your mom.
she's gonna break another wooden spoon over my butt.
Good.
Hasn't been like
But
that
I feel like
since.
this is supposed to be about ghosts, but I'm not.
Well, this is haunting.
Yeah, I wouldn't
Yeah.
find
I
a
mean-
ghost as scary as society as a whole. You know what I mean? Like, this is, to me, the horrifying
More
part.
Do you ever
yeah.
think, though, that, like, we, in some ways, we haven't evolved? Maybe it's a different subject in a manner of speaking. Like, for example, as people get older, I think there is something to be said about elder care, and what we're going to do with our elderly population. And obviously,
right.
if it weren't a thing, then there wouldn't be, like, elder care law
Yeah.
and attorneys that specialize in those rights.
Yep.
And I'm afraid I don't know that like I said, the subject has changed, and maybe it's not necessarily children for the 21st century, but it is this growing elderly population.
That's true.
I mean, like, where do we see history repeating ourselves? And maybe that is something that we need to take away from these sorts of conversations, because if we don't learn from it, or maybe we learn to a certain degree, but we don't learn enough. Do you know what I mean to say? Like, maybe we think to ourselves, we'll never let this happen to children again. We'll never let this happen. But, like, could we possibly forget that we could let it happen to somebody else?
And I feel like that was what was commented in the Pennhurst movie, is these places are slowly coming back. If it's a real institution where they're learning how to, like, take care of themselves and learning basic, money budgeting and whatnot, with the idea of them actually being exited from those services and living fulfilling lives, then yes, I'm all for it. I understand life skills. I'm a teacher, There is something to be said for teaching that kind of stuff. Anybody can learn something, I'm a teacher. I truly believe that. But when you hear that these places are coming back, I just really hope that it's not, like, privately funded and they're just doing it to make money. I want to know that these kids are
Right.
actually getting something.
And like you said, Ray, that it's now shifting. You think it's shifting now to
I
elder
think,
care.
I think it's a possibility.
And
I think
that
it's
is a
it's a
big possibility.
consideration.
And you got to take a look at just the way that. Let's take the United States as a whole, for example. How we fought wars. We were the big one on top at the end of World War II, and then we had a quagmire known as what was that? The Korean War, and then we had that colossal screw up of Vietnam. And you're seeing the same thing again and again and again and again and again, and we keep screwing up, and we've been doing it recently as well with Afghanistan and everything. And
Well, there's
yeah,
things like
that's
that,
history.
Like, you can't win war anymore, from what people were saying.
No, and that's the thing. And it that started back in the 60s with Vietnam. You're seeing the whole thing happen again, whereas it's not that we aren't learning and letting history repeat itself, as we are learning, but the situation has changed to the point where it's the same lessons being taught, but with different variables. So for this, we've got children. For the next thing that it could be is the elder abuse. What's it going to be after elder abuse? So we're still seeing the same lessons being taught. We are learning the lessons, and now we're just going, oh, well, we learned our lesson on this one. Who else can we abuse this time?
We have to
The
reevaluate
demographics
our
are
Dunbar.
shifting, that's all.
That's right. It just keeps going from place to place.
Like, I've worked at 2 alternative education schools, and they're privately run, and the people who work there are fantastic, but there are no resources at all. There were no textbooks. All the chairs were half broken, and no technology at all.
Well, and something else too that I just thought about, and I mentioned that the one place that he worked, there were times when he would say, "Hey, I can't come home yet. I'm stuck here till the parents get here," and the parents would literally like roll in around 5, 6 o'clock at night. The school day ended at like 2:30, 3 o'clock, but my husband was there not getting paid, stuck there for an extra 3 hours because the parents didn't feel like coming and picking their kid up.
Yeah, the kid had a meltdown at 2:30, couldn't get on the bus, and so we had to keep the kid because he wasn't safe. That kind of deal. And that's another thing where behavior kids were put in the same, and are still being put in the same institution as kids with autism and, mental handicaps. And it's just... and again, it's because we don't know where else to put them, so let's just put them all together.
And PJ's an example of someone who was not doing an adequate job. He was going above and beyond. He was not getting paid to stay there. But you're not going to leave a child with those issues by themselves until the parents show up. The parents are the ones with the problem there. Come get your kid. It is not PJ's job to stay there, but because he cared, he did.
Yep.
Legally speaking, he did. He wasn't going to mess that up. So, I mean, I guess the overall question is, are we worried about being adequate, or do we actually want to be, not, I don't even say like reactive. We want to be proactive, right?
Yes.
We need to be proactive in the future of aging population. Don't be reactive. Don't wait for the next Pennhurst expose to help elder care. Look into your grandparents right now. See what's happening at their facilities. Don't just go on visiting day when they've been washed up and dressed in nice clothes. Visit randomly.
And we just learned today that apparently the average cost of being in a nursing home is $12,000 a month per person. So my thought is, if you're getting if you're paying that kind of money,
any of us even make that? Like, if you think about it, that's $144,000 a year.
I should be in
If
a
you
palace.
have 2 parents, it's $288,000 a year.
Guys, you're a lot better off just putting them in an apartment in Los Angeles.
I would.
It's a lot cheaper.
Yeah, right?
It almost
Get a
makes
cruise.
them. Yes, I was going to say, at least they'd be entertained.
Yeah. Yeah.
My God, I'd take that job.
So I'm sorry, Laura. Did you find the story?
Open bar.
Yeah.
I mean, wait. Sorry.
So Laura has that story she wants to share.
Yes, well, I found like a whole long string of stories. To
Tell
be
us
honest
your
with
stories,
You. I mean,
yes.
I'll just go through a few. Now, the first one I did mention, it does not say what his issues were, but he was admitted at the age of 9. And he was placed on a ward with 45 other residents. His parents visited him 2.5 weeks after his admission and found he was badly bruised, his mouth was cut, he was heavily drugged, and he did not recognize his mother. On this visit, their last name were the Heights observed 25 residents walking the ward naked. Others were only partially dressed. During the short period of time, Robert had lost skills he had possessed prior to his admission. The Heights actually did promptly remove Robert from the institution, with Mrs. Height commenting that she wouldn't leave a dog in conditions like that. So, Ray, do you want to read this next one here?
About
George?
Plaintiff George Sorodos entered Pennhurst in 1970 at the age of 7. In the 7 years that George has been at Pennhurst, so like at this point he would have been 14.
14, yeah.
His former foster mother, Marianne Karanfa, testified that in her weekly visits to Pennhurst, there have been only 4 occasions when George was not injured.
Oh my
Yikes.
gosh.
She was
Weekly visits for 7 years, only
7
4
So
times.
what, do you guys want to hear what he suffered?
Oh.
Numerous reported injuries, well, obviously.
Yeah.
Bites,
Was
scratches.
it violence and abuse?
Yes, it was. I know.
An
injury.
An injury.
God, I can't stand the sameness. Scratches, black eyes, and loss of teeth. Loss of teeth.
Yep. Remember, if they fall and hurt themselves, to get them plucked out.
She also
right.
testified that she recently observed what appeared to be cigarette burns on George. Do you know what that means, though? Like, if you think about it, when you think about folks that smoke, like cigarettes, it's almost like a leisure activity. You think about, like, you've heard cigarette break, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like something you do, in a group, I guess, recreationally, but it's something that you do to relax. So, ... think about, like, the abusers. This is just me. Maybe I'm going off on, like, a weird, like, direction.
Well, in this time period, though, people were smoking
It was
everywhere.
commonly,
Yeah,
100%
but you
of the
still
time.
did it. You still did it to enjoy it. Like,
Yeah.
you didn't
Yeah.
do it.
It was to take an edge off. And
recreation.
it's-
It was still to take an
Yeah.
edge off. So this was part of, like, a release. I think that's pretty much the case, regardless of where smoking started in history. It was something that you did.
Well, smoking started recreationally, but it was also more of a spiritual thing.
was
If you're
the
going to
Native
take a look at the
Americans.
natives, yeah.
Either way, it was not work related.
was not work-related, no.
It was
No, do you know how hard it is to grow that stuff?
it was not work related.
Wait, what are we growing? Hold up, tobacco? Okay.
Unless you're
But
that
legal.
type of multitasker, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like if you are torturing somebody while like smoking, I would surmise that you're finding some sort of enjoyment or relax or something. It's a parallel.
You're just getting into KGB territory. Tell me what they don't know. No, cigarette burn. Yeah. Oh, crap, I got the line again.
Well, I do think, and having read Nellie Bly's 10 Days in a Madhouse, I personally believe, not all of them, of course, but I think that the majority of the people who were working at Pennhurst or in similar places really do lose their humanity, at least for the people they're supposed to be caring for.
Well,
They do see them as less than human. They clearly do not treat them with any dignity
right.
or compassion.
Well,
Hence-
look at in our history of Black Americans. Same thing. You need to see them as subhuman, or else what you're doing is unconscionable.
Yeah.
So you have to tell yourself, I'm doing this to someone who is not totally human.
Same with soldiers working Nazi prison
Yep.
camps.
Exactly.
What happens though when you get to the point, like when you almost like enjoy it? You know what I mean? Like,
Psychopaths, yeah.
well, no, but if you think about it, there are
You mean half the
instances.
SS?
Just mental training and like reprogramming your brain.
Reprogramming, I think,
Yeah.
is the right
Yeah.
way to put it. Like, and you see that reprogramming anytime there's like, abuse inflicted on a people.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, definitely.
So other stories we have, PJ?
This one says plaintiffs Larry and Kenny Taylor entered Pennhurst on February 28th, 1961. In the early 1970s, Mrs. Taylor questioned the staff about the medication being given to Larry. He was very lethargic, falling asleep at school and barely able to walk. The physician in charge of Larry's unit checked Larry's medical record and found that he was on Dilantin, a drug used to control epileptic seizures.
Angie, Dilantin, is that still a thing? And is it used for epilepsy? Okay.
Seizure control. Okay.
Angie's here, and she knows all about medicine because that's her job.
She's my drug dealer.
Yeah.
Legal
Legal drug
Educated.
dealer.
Educated.
Educated drug dealer.
He's a pharmacist.
She works at
Pharmacist
a pharmacy.
assistant?
Nice.
Assistant, yeah.
Assistant,
cool.
yeah.
So continue.
The physician. I thought of Arrested Development.
I was just happy because we have Angie, who is our resident expert on
or of
psychotropic
the office.
drugs.
I mean, not
So Dilantin.
assistant to the regional manager.
Assistant to the region, yeah.
The physician in charge of Larry's unit checked Larry's medical record and found that he was on Dilantin, a drug used to control epileptic seizures. Mrs. Taylor testified that Larry had had only one seizure that she knew of, and that was when he was a baby. Larry was removed from Dilantin and placed on Meloril, a psychotropic drug. This too made him lethargic. Larry and Kenny were transferred to Woodhaven in 1975, where Mrs. Taylor testified that Larry does not receive any psychotropic medication and is able to walk independently. Larry was often injured while at Pennhurst. On one occasion, he was hospitalized for 2 weeks because of the head and face injuries he received as a result of a beating by another resident. Kenny, too, suffered serious injuries while at Pennhurst.
And so notice that she voluntarily takes them to Pennhurst after the expose, because in the 1970s.
Yeah.
So that's just, if I'm watching that expose, none of my kids are ever going to
When did the
go
expose come out?
1968.
So, okay, yeah.
Oh yeah, I did
So
the
they
math.
were in there before the expose.
No, she said 1971. She checked his medical. Oh, but they.
She checked them in the late 60s. Yeah.
Well, still.
Or early 60s. Dan's reading it. Dan.
What?
Oh, never mind.
Oh, I think you're another one.
It's
Yeah,
okay.
She got another one.
It's okay. But like the idea of that, and then the massive amounts of drugs you're putting these kids on,
Yeah.
especially when a lot of babies have febrile seizures. Sophie had one when she, remember that febrile seizures? So just because she had one when she had a really high fever doesn't mean that she's going to need to take epileptic medicine later. You're just controlling a child that way.
Yeah, I mean, well, we read it earlier in the court case, and that's just one example, I'm sure.
One
of
example.
many of how they used it for control and not for treatment.
Even the Pennhurst movie, they said, oh yeah, lots of drugs up there, lots of drugs. Go ahead, Dan.
So we've got another plaintiff here. This was Nancy Beth Bowman. She entered Pennhurst at the age of 10 in 1961. She was placed on a large ward which had about 65 residents and often only 2 childcare aides in attendance. 2 childcare aides out of a ward of 65 residents.
Can I just say, fun fact, that's what most schools do.
I know.
But not all of
but
our students have special needs.
It gets
Right.
better. It gets better. And by better, I mean, holy crap. During her residency at Pennhurst, she started to develop maladaptive behavior, i.e. biting and pushing. And as a result of this maladaptive behavior, she was placed in seclusion for days at a time. So while she was at Pennhurst, she lost teeth.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. There's more of a running theme here.
Let's pull the teeth out.
Badly bruised, and she was also abused by the staff. When asked about her present physical condition, Nancy Beth's mother replied, Nancy Beth will be scarred for the rest of her life.
Mm-hmm.
How ridiculous is this?
Yeah, it just keeps going. Just keeps going.
Oh, there are more.
Yeah.
There are more.
Oh,
Those-
yeah.
that was just
Dozens.
one, and that
Yeah.
was just a tiny little blip.
Yeah. And the thing is, I think it's really easy for us to say, oh, they were beaten and it's awful. But I think the reality is, like, I've never been beaten in my life. And poor Ray, just a couple weeks ago, fell and separated his shoulder. Don't laugh at
Ouch.
him. But you even made the comment, Ray, after it happened, like a few days later, and how much pain you were in. And you were like, I don't know how people like who are boxers or battered
women,
you know,
and
yeah.
stuff, like
Yeah.
or children that suffer abuse. I don't know how they handle
because
it.
he accidentally fell
Yeah.
and really did hurt himself. But like, imagine like being a boxer or something, like somebody really hits
Taking
you.
those smacks all the
and
time.
you get
yeah.
up and you get it
You
again,
do
and
it
then you do it
again.
the next night.
Right.
And here are little kids.
Right, and not just that, but boxers tend to, after the development of the super padded glove, they tend to get punched in the face repeatedly. And that's why you see boxers that have, that are slow when it comes, mentally. It's because they're taking so
getting
much damage.
concussions
Yeah,
every
they're getting
day.
concussed
Yeah.
constantly.
Yeah.
Back in, the day of fisticuffs, bare knuckle boxing, you were an idiot if you went for somebody's face.
Yeah.
You're gonna cut up your hands. You might break their teeth, but that tooth is now embedded in your hand.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, that wasn't there
So
before.
that was more of like body shots, and even body shots are gonna leave a lot of damage. And these are guys that are physically adapted to take this kind of
Right,
beating.
right.
Imagine what
And-
it does to somebody that
like
just.
me.
I don't know, Ray. I think we could turn you into a boxer yet.
But
No,
no,
you
but you're
really
absolutely
can't.
right. And it's easy. I think, well, not easy, but I don't know that we all are really like thinking about like how awful it truly is to be beaten and to know
Right.
that it could happen at any
Because
time.
it's something that normally doesn't
Right.
happen, so you're not going to think
Right.
about it, especially if it happening to you when you've never encountered anything like that before. Now, I never was, I was disciplined as a kid, so yeah, I get that.
Yeah, but I
But-
think that's different. Yeah.
It's a lot different.
yeah.
It's a hell of a lot
Oh,
different.
yeah.
You get disciplined, your parents aren't going to intentionally leave you with bruises.
Yeah.
Yeah, losing teeth and
No,
broken
because
on
that
the
costs more
floor.
money. You know what I'm saying?
So it looks like Shanna, you have one there.
I do. Actually, I'm going to read two things because it actually is into our last court case. Then we can head into the rest of our story. So the first one is plaintiff Linda Taub, who was blind in addition to being retarded, was admitted to Pennhurst in 1966 at the age of 15. According to her father, during her 9-year residency at Pennhurst, Linda received only custodial care and she experienced regression rather than growth. Time on the ward was spent sitting and rocking with few activities. During one of their visits in 1968, Linda's parents found Linda, a person capable of walking, strapped to a wheelchair by a straitjacket. A staff member explained that by strapping her to the chair, they would know exactly where Linda was. While at the institution, Linda was badly bruised and scarred.
Okay. Couple comments. 9 years, and the parents are clearly visiting. With apparently no intention of helping, taking her out, any of that. The other thing that I'll mention is, I know this is going to shock everyone in the room. I have been in a straitjacket. No, I really have. It was...
Honestly, I'm not surprised.
I know. No one is surprised.
I really wish I would have
I
known
was
about
put in one
this.
in college. I think it was one of our psych class. Maybe it was my ed psych class to showcase what it was
Yeah.
like to be in it and how uncomfortable it is.
It
And how you
is.
sweat, like, because it's so
Right.
warm.
And
Yeah.
it's terrifying.
It was to teach us to not do that.
Yeah.
Right. And the straitjackets aren't meant to be bound tight. If you use the straitjacket properly, it is just to make sure that your arms hug your body so you can't do any physical harm to yourself or anybody else. But the way that it appears that they're being used at Pennhurst, and where a lot of asylums during this period were being used, is they're being extremely constrictive, and they're not allowing you the full mobility that a straitjacket should give you. And if used properly, should give you. If you see a lot of magicians saying that I can escape from this straitjacket, that's because they're using the straitjacket properly. And all they have to do is manipulate their arm a little bit so they can wiggle themselves out. That's how it's supposed to be.
Right.
Because the idea is, like, it's supposed to calm you down.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's
You
like
s-
the
you same
idea of
thing
a
with
weighted
dogs.
blanket.
Yeah. Dogs have that wrap you put around their
Yeah.
middles and it calms
Right.
them down. So you mentioned the whole 9-year stay. That means that she was 24, right? Which is important for this last one that I want to read because it leads into our final most important court case. It says approximately 21 of the 45 living units at Pennhurst are locked to prevent individuals from leaving their units. Those individuals over the age of 18 who have been voluntarily admitted to Pennhurst are theoretically free to leave the institution at any time. Those admitted on the petition of their parents are informed by their caseworker when they reach the age of 18 that they do not have to remain at Pennhurst. If the residents state that they wish to leave the institution and the staff determines that there is no place for them in the community or believes that the individuals are not ready to go into the community, the staff will petition the courts to have the individuals committed to the institution by a court. So that's interesting. Talk about not voluntary.
And
Right.
why? They're already overcrowded. I don't understand. Like, you don't have the staff, you don't have the space, you don't have the compassion. I mean, I get that these people are bringing in dollars, but why?
Right.
Yeah.
But see, that's the thing. That was the last part you had there. It's about the funding.
Dollars.
It's the dollars. So if you start losing your patience and if you start losing things that you, as a state government, you say, well, why aren't you bringing in this many people? And, well, we're going to cut your funding now because you don't need it, apparently. And that's not the case, but that's how things are going to be seen. And we can see it in schools all the time.
Well, and that's mentioned in schools. So the last part here says, thus the notion of voluntariness in connection with admission, as well as in connection with the right to leave Pennhurst, is an illusory concept. Few, if any, residents now have, nor did they have at the time of their admission, any adequate alternative to their institutionalization. As a practical matter, Pennhurst was and is their only alternative. Nearly all the parents of Pennhurst residents who testified stated that they placed their children in Pennhurst only as a last resort, and had there been community facilities or aid programs, their children would not have been placed at Pennhurst. And so again, the easy fix is
Right.
then to have FAPE, right? But this class action lawsuit, which comes after right to education, takes another 10 years before
Right.
anything is finalized. And what happens is, I think Pennhurst settles, right? They kind of just give up
Yeah,
finally.
Pennhurst
They
finally
settle.
settles. So before we get into the last court case,
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to read this one thing here quick.
Mhm.
This is a study done by James Conroy. He was the director of
such a good guy.
research of
Temple
the-
University.
Yeah, Temple
Mhm.
University Developmental Disability Center. He says that the former Pennhurst residents showed significantly faster development growth in the community than they had at Pennhurst. They received more services and more program time at less cost to public dollars. So you're already seeing something that would have made the state happy as hell. We can help these people. They're getting a better education in the way of functionality at a lesser cost.
And it leads me to believe that they wanted to keep Pennhurst open, at least people working there, because
Right,
they're
so
getting
they could
paid
continue
well.
to get the money.
I'm sorry
That's
that
what I was
seems
saying.
dark, but yeah.
So he also goes on to say, prior to the transfer of the residents from Pennhurst, over 60% of the families surveyed had opposed the transfer. 6 months later, the same families overwhelmingly approved of this decision because now they're seeing all of the things that are going on. Measured by a variety of standards, the families generally perceived the happiness of their relatives to be much greater in this community than they were at the community at Pennhurst.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, holy crap.
Yeah.
And I just want to make a note in here as well that these stories are from the Pennhurst Memorial and Preservation Alliance at preservepennhurst.org. And you can also access the complete transcripts from the Halderman versus Pennhurst case. So anyone who's really interested in the deep dive, it's out there.
Yeah.
Well, and if you go on to, it's called Legal, Eagle. I think of Legal Eagle on YouTube.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, but they have pretty much any court case that's out there legally has to be online for access.
Right.
So you'll find all of this.
If you want to go into more detail, and the site that I found this stuff on, I have up right now, is called disabilityjustice.org.
I love disability justice. I noticed you're on the same website because everything you're pulling, I was like, I know where you got that.
So this has all three cases.
And there's a really good video on there too that showcases just the growth of special education. It's amazing.
I didn't look at that, but I did see that. And this site just has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to not just these particular cases, but all the cases that came after this.
And I think you're truly horrified to learn some of the information there, but I think they're a little more polite in their take.
They are. I think they're very tasteful when it comes to giving you all of the information without
all the unsavory.
Without all the unsavory
But I think
bits.
we need some of the unsavory so we know not to do this in the future. So the last one I want to mention is you can actually find the entirety of this court case on oyez.org. Again, all these court cases are out there. And it's Youngberg versus Romeo. Youngberg was the superintendent of Pennhurst during the time that Romeo, the incompetent, to use quotes from that, was institutionalized there. So this was argued in 1983, January 11th, actually. So a day before my birthday. But 5 years before I was born, 1982. And it was decided in June of 1982. So Nicholas Romeo was a 33-year-old man with the mental capacity of an 18-month-old child. So, definitely...
Say that again? How old was he?
He was 33 years old and had the mental capacity of an 18-month-old child. Yeah. So we're talking extreme issues. Following the death of his father, Romeo's mother was unable to adequately care for Romeo and had him involuntarily committed to Pennhurst State School and Hospital on a permanent basis. So she didn't want to, but it was involuntarily forced. Okay. During his time in the state facility, he suffered injuries on numerous occasions and was physically restrained at times. Now, his mom is the one who actually brings the court case there because he cannot do it on his own. Again, he had been labeled incompetent, to put that in air quotes. She claimed that his treatment violated the protections of the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment and the prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment in the 8th Amendment. Specifically, Romeo's mother claimed Romeo had the right to safe conditions of confinement, freedom from bodily restraints, and access to habilitation, training, or treatment with the goal of eventual release. So you think this seems like a slam dunk case, especially after right to education and the Pennhurst civil lawsuit. Who do you think wins? In 1982, who do you think wins?
Well, judging by the tone of your voice, it's definitely going to be Pennhurst.
It's going to be Pennhurst. Yes. Do you want to know why?
This is the thing that. Oh, go ahead. Why?
Because the court instructed the jury that they could only find that Pennhurst violated Romeo's constitutional rights if the officials had been, quote, deliberately indifferent to Romeo's medical and psychological needs.
Right, but see, the exact same things were brought up in the prior case, and none of that was put in. So whoever oversaw that, and I know it wasn't the judge before, because he had said
He
that
had his own feelings.
he wanted to make sure that he had overseen everything that went through that was coming through Pennhurst, and they denied him. Mm-hmm. Because he wanted to make sure that none of this happened again, and guess what? It happened again.
Yeah. So, and that's the thing, because they could not prove that the Pennhurst professionals had been deliberately indifferent, they were trying to do their job adequately, to keep using that word, because that they found in favor of Pennhurst. They tried, because he also was involuntarily committed. When you're involuntarily committed, you lose a heck of a lot of rights. And so this obviously goes on appeal to the U.S. Courts of Appeals, right? And so the Court of Appeals held that the Eighth Amendment's prohibition of cruel and unusual punishment was inapplicable because he had been involuntarily committed. That only applies, the punishment, to people who have been convicted of crimes. So if you're convicted of a crime, you get the Eighth Amendment. If you're involuntarily committed to an insane asylum, you lose that amendment. You lose that. Because what happens is, if you've been involuntarily committed, they have to defer to the medical professionals. So mom doesn't get a say. He doesn't get a say. The medical professionals get the ultimate say.
So where are the medical professionals? Because clearly they weren't there.
But they did say that under the due process clause of the 14th Amendment, his rights had been taken away. So they end up winning because of the 14th Amendment, but not the 8th.
I will just add that nowadays in modern day, it's relatively hard to be involuntarily committed, that you have to be a danger to yourself or others.
Yes.
And in
that's
some
right.
ways, that's actually can be a negative, because there are people who really do need help, but you can't get them help because they're not
they need, because
dangerous.
And because they outright refuse no matter what.
Right.
And fun fact, the Supreme Court also weighed in. They agreed that certain evidence had been improperly excluded. Okay, so they said the jury had been instructed erroneously, and the plaintiff had constitutionally protected interests in safety, non-restrictive confinement conditions, and habilitation. So he ends up winning in many ways. But again, he wasn't a danger to himself. He just had the mental capacity of an 18-month-old.
Yep.
So 1980s, again, we're talking that was 40 years ago, because I'm 36 now.
41 years ago.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Yeah. So in any case, those are the three landmark cases that make our current world for special education. And I can say, working in that world, and PJ can too, that a lot of good has come from it. You know, we are removing these terrible words and we're getting more diagnoses. Mm-hmm. We're learning the best ways to treat people. We're finding the best types of drugs that have the least amount of effects. We really are trying in a positive way. But then I worry about us slipping backward because of that comment made in the movie. So I feel like if we're going to end anywhere before we go into Kyle's thoughts, it's that we really need to focus on staying proactive and knowing what's happening, because I cannot stress this enough as an educator. I know PJ stresses it too. FAPE stands for free and appropriate public education. Your child deserves to have an appropriate education, totally free, because you pay taxes.
Mm-hmm. Emphasis on appropriate.
Yes, appropriate. So you follow their LRE, their least restrictive environment. And that's why Chapter 14, so PJ's job, says that kids get special designed instruction on purpose to make that happen. They get a teacher like PJ, who's a special ed teacher, and they get the best help they can to meet those goals. And they also get transition to life after high school.
Yep.
Chapter 16 is me. I find that the appropriate public education for kids who are gifted, so they're not being held back in the classroom. They can kind of advance forward and accelerate their education. But I do not give transition goals. Fun fact. Gifted still has a long ways to go in my mind, because when you graduate high school, your GIEP does not follow you to college. Apparently, you're done being gifted at the age of 18 when you leave school.
Well, yeah, don't you know that?
I guess.
As soon as you go into, the real world, nobody cares about you.
But an IEP follows you to college.
Yep.
You take your IEP. If you're chapter 14, that goes to college, so you had the appropriate educational experience.
And then after college.
And after college.
No, after college there are things that an IEP can get.
Oh, really?
You. Yeah.
Oh,
and there's
cool.
programs,
Like
OR,
OVR, occupational vocational rehabilitation.
See, I don't get that for my kids.
Like if you get all of your certifications in like auto mechanics and things like that, OVR can step in and buy you tools, like a full tool set to help you out. And they can help people get driver's licenses and all kinds of really cool stuff.
Yeah, there's so many things out there that have come from this, but they're not really. I feel like we're pushing it more in schools now, which is great. But it's even come since the 90s. It's gotten better.
Yeah.
So let's keep being proactive. Push for gifted. Push for special ed.
That's right. If it works with teenagers' zits, we can do it for our society too.
That's right.
What, proactive, right? Is that what we're talking about? Okay.
That happened.
For any of you who are listening and who got that, thank you. You're as old as we are. If not, I'm so sorry.
It still exists.
Talk about a blemish on our podcast, Dan.
Oh.
That was a good one. I like that.
That's
good.
I liked
not
it
a good
too.
one.
It made me smile.
It makes me
was-
smile.
I know.
It was something. All right. Anyway, so with that in mind, let's move into creepy thoughts with Kyle.
I think one of the people. I thought it would be a good idea if we turned Shannon into the girl. I thought it would be a good idea if we. I thought it would be a good idea. I thought it would be a good idea if we into the girl from Ringu. This is bad. This is really bad. It's Ouija. Speaking of haunted houses and the haunted house attraction at Pennhurst, my thought is, what if a modern day haunted house momentarily appeared in the same location or building in a past time period during some sort of weird space-time crossover event? Would the residents at that location, whether it be a mansion, an asylum, a prison, whatever, would the residents at that location suddenly think that they were cursed and being plagued by witches and demons, when here it's just a bunch of people running around in Halloween masks? That rates a 10 on the I has boogers scale.
I love the eye has boogers because we can't do Oogie Boogie.
You might want to blow his nose.
But I wanted to make sure that has and boogers has Z's, not S's. It's very important. I has boogers.
It makes me think of Torchwood, because that show, it has a couple ghost episodes, but it's always just timelines intermingling with each other, and so they're haunting each other, but they're not actually haunting each other. It's just, two timelines mixing in.
Right.
Yeah, like there's the first ghost episode where they're in an old hospital, and they cross over to when the hospital's like still in operation, and they see this ghost of a nurse walking up to them. She's like, "You're not supposed to be here."
I mean,
I remember that one.
Yeah.
Yes,
that's
okay.
a good one.
But if you think about it, like, the inverse could be just as probable. Like, the folks from, like, the 21st century are dressed up like goblins. If I were dressed up thinking I'm having a good time and I see somebody that's dressed up from, like, 5-6 decades ago, that would creep me the heck out.
Yeah, right?
It would just, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
what if no one at Pennhurst was actually insane? What was happening was a parallel universe where all this haunted attractive trash was happening. And they're like, "Oh my gosh, I just saw a ghost." "Oh no, Dan, you're just crazy. Here, have some more drugs." "No, but I swear I saw somebody dressed up in a weird suit." And then 21st century, we're going on our little tour down the tunnels, and boom, Dan pops up like, "Oh gosh, it's a ghost."
Well, anytime I appear, I usually scare people, so you're okay with that.
Parallel universe is happening.
Nah, all I have to do is just show up. I scare people at work all the time.
You scare me right now.
Unintentionally. Yeah. Especially with the me in the suit thing. Yeah, that's like an everyday
I'm glad
occurrence.
you didn't wear a suit this time, but I'm also glad that you're wearing clothes.
Well, I can't let myself hang out all the time.
Oh my.
I'm glad for that too, Dan.
Well, I thought you'd be the one who would like really appreciate, but it's all right. It's all right, right?
Well, it leaves something to my imagination.
Well,
I've seen it all before.
Yeah.
I really
well,
haven't.
yeah.
Don't worry, PJ. I really haven't. Angie, I swear I haven't, Angie. Yeah.
This took an awkward turn.
This is the last time we asked Dan to hang out.
Yeah, Dan, goodbye. Hang out. You have to use proper words. Dan, come over to be at our house and play board games. You have to word it correctly. Because he takes hang out to a whole new level.
Dan, come over and play with me.
Doesn't
No.
seem-
That
wait,
seems much
what?
easier.
Yeah, I know. It's like, we'll take that.
I'll take parallel universes.
So basically, dress code is going to be on every invitation you issue from now on.
Yeah. And if you don't meet the dress code, we'll just figure you're a ghost.
Oh, okay.
Hold
Can
up.
can I come in my
I
long
know.
johns?
I don't know.
They're
Are they
skin
period
tight,
specific?
so.
Are they silver?
Do they glow in the
Oh,
dark?
I mean, I don't have silver. I could get some silver.
He's making a Long John Silver joke. The food.
I know.
Are you sure?
He was playing
I haven't
along.
been to one in so long.
We're trying to.
I didn't like their hush
Oh,
puppies.
thanks. Trying
I
to.
love
Thank
their
you.
hush puppies.
Can't stand
Their
it.
hush
Anyway,
puppies are
so
delicious.
back to Kyle's thought. So what do you think, Laura?
I think that that it's a super creepy idea, the idea of timelines colliding. I mean, it's I think there's a lot of possibility for things like that. I heard a long time ago, this is way off topic, but I heard a long time ago some conspiracy theory that kind of made sense to me about aliens. And the theory is that the little green, gray men, are actually humans in the future. And, the fact that they have large eyes and big heads and no mouths and only like 3 digits on their hand is
Really
because they're
long
in
digits too.
right, because they're in front of touch screens all day. So they need big eyes. They don't need mouths. They're just
How did they eat?
I don't know all the
Osmosis.
science.
Actually, well, there's a new theory about
Oh.
that they are just robots, the Greys.
Oh.
And it's other species that have made them and everything, and that's why they look the way they do.
Well, that could, I have no
I like
idea.
your theory.
But, but the theory is if they are us in the future, it's us in like an alternative dimension. And then they've just figured out, because in theory, actually traveling through dimensions would probably be easier than traveling light years through space.
Yeah.
Given the time.
If we
that
ever do
involved.
a Skinwalker Ranch episode, like there's a lot of talk about just things appearing and disappearing in thin air.
That's one I'd
Right.
definitely like to talk with you about.
So
This is my podcast. Talk with me over here. Don't look at PJ. Me, hostess with the mostess.
But you always shun me.
Because you don't wear clothes.
I'm sorry. I'm more
because he
comfortable
wears
with that.
clothes?
Because he doesn't wear clothes.
You said you wear clothes.
Because you don't wear clothes.
No,
I talk
heard,
fast.
I heard the don't.
Oh, okay, I didn't.
You
I
don't
was
listen
confused.
to me. You don't listen to me.
So ultimately, my take is that I think it's super creepy. I think it's possible. And I think there could be a thinning of the veil, as it were, in certain spaces. So anyway, Ray?
I could buy that. Yeah, I could definitely buy that. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I'll just reiterate. I think, instead of creeping out the folks from the past, the folks from the future or from present day can be just as creeped out from the whole situation. Maybe they'll just end up scaring each other.
It makes for really good haunted attraction.
I know.
Well, I think it adds a new level to the idea of like that residual
You know, it'd be
haunting as well.
Yeah.
Right. And not to be total nerdy geeky, but if you take string theory into account, then you're going to have overlapping strings, therefore overlapping,
that trash outta here.
times and everything. Yeah, just don't unravel yours.
But
Because then you'll be like me.
Like, let's just say it happened and there was like some sort of bend and like you're walking through present day and let's just say there's a photo or something like that and you see yourself in the background. You know what I mean? Because
Yes.
there's a
Then
I
I'd
don't
have to
like
ask,
that.
I'd have to ask
that would be creepy.
did you go to a certain hotel and is your name Jack?
Or did you get lost on an island in the middle
With
of the
polar
Pacific?
bears. That's why I hate the whole
I don't know,
series.
guys. I'll have to ask my twin.
I loved that joke that I made for you the entire time that show was on. guys, don't say anything. I didn't get to see the new episode of Lost. PJ, I saw the episode of Lost last night. Don't say anything. You want to know what happens? They get lost. Oh, he got so mad. Every Monday. Shut up, Dan. Every Monday.
I'd high five you because I hated the show. But I did appreciate the last season because I totally understood the last episode. I thought that was beautiful. Yep. So we'll give that to you. So I'm glad that this was Kyle's creepy thought because it leads right into our ghostly discussions then. So we've had all of this series discussing all the atrocities. There is no question in my mind that there is negative juju at that place.
Oh, yeah.
There are unmarked graves, for crying out loud. Again, we don't know how many people died there, but at least half, according to the class action lawsuit, the right to education, at least half of the people who are in these state schools left because they died. That's how they got out of these places.
Well, that's called graduation.
Oh boy. Anyway, so with that in mind, let's discuss the actual ghosts there.
So, there are 2 books. You can get them for $4 each. The digital versions on Amazon through their Kindle app. And the author, Tamara Lawrence, works there at Pennhurst during the Halloween events and everything. And at the beginning of every chapter, she does like a little history bit of Pennhurst, which is really neat.
Well, that is pretty cool.
And she talks about how in the first floor of the Mayflower building used to be part of like the ghost hunt and tour, but now it is a museum run by 2 former employees. And she talked with them one day. Well, first, she talked with them. That was a different thing. But so they run the museum. They kind of keep the history alive, which I appreciate.
Oh yeah.
Especially considering, and we'll talk about like the fact that Pennhurst now is like a sideshow attraction. You know,
you have to have. You got to keep
that
that reverence.
Yeah. But there's another woman who worked there, who filmed a pilot with Tamara Lawrence. The pilot never like got turned into a series or anything. It never aired, but she recognized Tamara and they talked, and she said she worked there in the 70s, and Tamara asked her about the Mayflower building and all that, and she said, "Where did you work?" And Tamara, they're on the 2nd floor because that's where Tamara worked, and this woman Diane said, "Oh, I worked on this floor," and Tamara says, "Was it the male ward even then?" "Yes." "So tell me, what was it like working with the men? Tell me about what your day was like." "Well, I colored a lot." "You mean in coloring books?" "Yes, it was something to do with them, and they liked it. They liked the art and making things." "So tell me about the 3rd floor." Diane's countenance dimmed. She says, "I never went up there. I think bad things happened up there. People would go up, and I'd not see them come back down."
Oh, jeez.
"Really? Really? I heard all kinds of noises and yelling up there. It was scary at times." So that's just an interesting, like another first-hand account from someone who worked there of something. And that wasn't even like the Quaker building, which was considered the violent one.
Well, the Mayflower building has been known to have lots of issues with ghosts. According to Weird New Jersey, you can see shadow people there. EVPs have been captured. Investigators have been touched. There are slamming doors, footsteps, vomiting sounds. There's also creepy box music, because, why not? But according to littlehouseofhorrors.com, there's also a guy called the King in the boiler room of the Mayflower. He's a shadow figure who will touch you. He'll poke you.
He's
he'll
a smoker.
Choke you. You can smell cigar smoke.
He's a smoker.
What'd you get?
Is he a midnight toker?
Oh,
I don't know.
my.
I didn't do that much research on him.
Oh, so he's not playing his music in the sun.
Wait, he's a smoker and a choker.
He could be. And a choker. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think the Steve Miller Band talked about that.
He does not like people. He'll tell you to leave. Get out. Go and get.
Apparently, especially doesn't like women. Like he'll push women and touch them, and he's a creeper. He's a major creeper. And I did hear that there was a team of people from Ripley's, Believe It or Not. Yeah, and they were there. And it was in the Mayflower building, and they thought they were attributing it to this character, the King, who was, I guess, a maintenance worker there in the 40s and 50s. but they were one of them who said, because this I guess happened multiple times. You mentioned the music box, and they said that very loudly they could hear a music box coming from the third floor, and so they went up and up, and as they approached and got to the top landing, it was getting louder, and then they got there and it went silent, and then later in the evening they heard it again, but this time in the basement. And this is what I think why they were attributing it to this guy, the king, because that's supposedly his primary domain.
Yeah.
Boiler room. Not creepy at all. And so, but they hear this music box again, and they go down. And as they get closer, it gets louder until they're there, and then silence again. And the thing that really is weird to me is like, it feels like it's luring them.
Yeah.
It wants them to go somewhere, and they're doing it.
It happens a lot.
It makes me think of our house when we hear that ding, 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 ding. No, thank you.
The author of this, both these books, they're called Ghosts of Mayflower. And she talks about how her very first day, because again, she's on the second floor, and her job was at the top of the steps leading to the second floor. People would come up, and she would greet them and then usher them down the hall where they could, like, you know, look in the different rooms and take pictures, listen for things, you know, see if they get an experience. It was the only real haunted part about the entire evening if you bought a ticket there.
I think with my research, the daytime tours are more historic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the evening that you'll have the haunted house attraction.
Yeah, so, and she worked evenings, because that's the only time the Mayflower building was open unless you got one of these daytime tours. But, because, you know, you would go through these typical haunted house things with actors and props, and then you would end it in the Mayflower where, you know, there were no props, you were just given a flashlight and pushed into this building, and you know, there's
here you go.
Yeah, and there's a set path, like just stay on the path. You can't turn back and go out the way you came. You have to keep moving forward through it. And so when they got to her, she'd be like, "Hi, you know, welcome to the second floor," and move them down. And on her first night there, from the third floor, she heard a little child say, "Mommy," and everyone says, like, you don't go to the third floor. You don't. And it was always sealed off from, guess it still is from what I've gathered.
So what happens up? I need to know what happens on the third floor.
And there are interesting, like, it's interesting. She and a lot of people would hear the sounds of wheelchairs rolling across the floor above them and footsteps and things like that. But no one with a wheelchair was allowed on the third floor because there weren't any elevators. Anyone wheelchair bound lived on the first floor. So that was just an interesting tidbit.
Well, according to the Pennhurst Asylum Civil War Ghost website, they said that the sounds that you'll hear are children's crying and even laughter. You can hear medical implements being moved about, and you can hear the crash of rusted metal. So maybe it's that, actually. Maybe they're not hearing the wheels. Maybe they were hearing, like, metal. If there was, like, electric shock therapy happening up there, they were put into chairs.
That definitely did. So on the second floor, a lot of the normal things, like things that were expected every night, would be hair pulling, especially for females. There was one ghost who they all called the Shadow Man, and he stayed, I should say, in the common room where there are a lot of cabinets, a lot of chairs to sit in. You would often see him just sitting in one of these rubber cushioned chairs. But he liked picking on women. He would push them, pull their hair, things like that. Tapping on shoulders was a big one. There was a nurse, and her big thing was she would jab people with needles.
Oh, jeez.
Like the ghost, no one knows who the real nurse was, but like a lot of people would be like, I know what a shot feels like. Yeah. Like, I just got a needle in the neck, or I got a needle in my leg. And they're like, this just happened. And, you know, she'd hear someone yell down the hall, ow! And there's one weekend where it happened like 3 times in one weekend.
Oh, jeez.
So I'm wondering if this is somebody that maybe even the woman who wrote this book knows. Somebody posted on a Reddit here. I've worked at Pennhurst Asylum for 3 years. Are there any questions, paranormal or otherwise? And someone asks, what is the most terrifying experience you've had? And the person that posted this said, well, my most terrifying experience was in the administration building. She said it was in the tunnels underneath.
The tunnels.
Now, it is what is now known as containment. There's a long hallway that is now a bunk hall. At the time, there was nothing in it except gurneys and old wheelchairs. I was relieving someone for their break, and after they left, I stood in the middle of the hallway beside a gurney waiting for customers to come in. It was pumped full of fog, so I could barely see, but I knew that I was the only one there. Well, about 2 minutes into being alone, I felt a huge hug on the back of my shirt, and it was enough to make me stumble backwards. I whipped around to see if there was anyone there, and there wasn't. When the person came back, I told her about it, and she let me know about the little girl who loves to play with people down there, and she was connected to one of those gurneys.
Mm.
So in her honor, she said she got a tattoo.
Oh, jeez.
So that's just...
Yeah.
Think about that. If you're down there, you know it's a section that has a lot of stories to tell in and of itself, and you hear all these stories, and then you get a hug from behind.
Yeah.
Fun fact, the tunnels is part of the attraction for the haunted.
That's right, and that's what this person was saying. They were down
Yeah.
there so they could relieve somebody else who was down there for break.
Yeah, Tamara said there was often a little girl in a white dress in Mayflower, and during a seance, someone got the name Mary from the spirit they're talking to. So this girl now then took on the name Mary.
Whether it was her name or not, yeah.
Yes,
Right.
and over the course of this season, people were asking for Mary to come out and things like that, and she would encourage. She's like, "Yeah, there's a little girl named Mary up here, and so maybe Mary will make an appearance for you." And then one day or one night, someone asked, "Is Mary your friend?" She's immediately just like, "No," and she felt this horrible sense of like anger surround her, and her flashlight started to flicker, and for the rest of the evening, her flashlight was failing her, and she just felt this horrible sense of anger all
done
around.
messed up, Tamara.
Yeah, wrong line, honey.
Mary's your best friend.
And she was one that like she had never seen for at least for the entirety of the first book. She talks about how she keeps seeing like all these people down the hall be like, "There's a little girl there," and she'd run down the hall. She's like, "Where?" And she's gone. And she's like, "I never saw Mary."
Mary doesn't exist. It's fake. So I'm not sure how much of your research went to the Quaker building, but I have down that there are numerous shadows that manifest and dissipate at will there. The shadows include what appear to be a small female child with long black hair, a hunched over presence with long dangling arms, and the upper portion of bodies looking over or around obstacles. Doors and a rocking chair have moved without anyone being near them. One investigator was shoved from behind hard enough on a staircase to leave a deep red mark on the small of his back. An investigator was scratched on the arm by an unknown object. And then other objects have been propelled in the basement, such as a pry bar and then some brass fixtures and whatnot. Lots of EMF spikes and EVPs, too. That's just the Quaker building. A lot of bad stuff happened there, as we discussed last time. You didn't really want to go to the Quaker building.
Yeah, and isn't that the one that's usually filled with shadow people?
That's also
all
all of them are, but
All of them are?
the
Mayflower.
Mayflower
Yeah.
is known for
Mayflower
shit.
is
Stuff
cheap.
happened in the Limerick building, too.
Limerick building has
Yeah.
the nurses.
know.
Well, it's interesting at the Limerick building. Is that what you're going to read right now? Go ahead.
No, go ahead. It's...
An apparition of woman in an old style nurse's uniform has been there, and she's been seen by a firefighter, a police officer, and a Marine, which lends me to believe that it's legit because those people are pretty logical and
Yeah.
straightforward. They're not like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, I saw a ghost." No, listen, I saw a ghost. She was a nurse.
Either that or she attracts men in uniforms.
Yowza, to use your word.
But yeah, Mayflower is by far the most active, which is why the tour goes through that one. And why she was able to write 2 books on it.
Well, yeah, if it has that kind of activity.
Yeah. Again, like, there's just so many things. Like, there's one where they went up to the 3rd floor because someone dropped their phone up there. And so they go up. It was one of her kid's friends, I believe. And so they go up to the 3rd floor to look for it. And then she hears one of her coworkers say, "Hurry up, they're coming." And they turn around. He's not there. And they later learn he wasn't even in the building. He was outside collecting flashlights from guests.
No.
So,
Mimic.
Yeah, there was a mimic in,
I was going to
in
say
the
that
3rd
sounds
floor.
awfully familiar.
Lauren Ray.
You know, as I'm hearing this, though, I have to say I'm very grateful that we never had touching in the house. Like, that, I think, might have, like...
That would have taken me to another
yeah, it,
level.
like, literally pushed me over the edge.
Discomfort.
She was already in your bed, so, like,
I was going to say, considering what you saw in the bed, Ray, yeah.
I mean, technically, Laura, I felt a presence. I don't know if you know. Do you know how it is where, like, somebody...
When you're not
somebody's
alone?
in the bed next to you, right? I mean, like, it's happened to me so often.
Are you talking about me?
Like, we're not...
hopefully, or else. But I agree. If there was touching, you're not okay with it.
You know what I mean? Like, let's just say, if somebody's in the bed, like, you feel like the
bed moves.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
bed
the pressure
moves.
on the bed. And,
Like, the dynamics, so to speak, of that space change.
Well, it's just like when you feel someone looking at you, you can feel them looking at you.
That was something else, is how she said from her spot at the top of the stairs, there were several rooms, and they were called just cell 1, cell 2, and all that. And there was this entity in cell 1, and it would just watch her. And she's like, I couldn't see anything, but I felt it all the time. And its eyes were just always on me, and there was just this anger. And people would go in there and feel just cold spots on them, and just feel great sense of unease. There were just like this bad angry feel.
I mean, when you get right down to it,
Yeah.
like, sometimes you just need to inhale and exhale.
There was one time where they heard this loud bang, and a window was just thrown open. And so these guests who just had an EVP recording going, they said, "Why did you do that?" And on the recording, they got one word: cornered.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Oh. That just kind of breaks your heart, though, you know?
And there's a toy plane, and it's Howie's plane. And you're not allowed to touch Howie's plane, or else he'll get very angry.
Well, don't touch Howie's plane, dang
And one night,
That's
Howie's
simple.
plane just disappeared, and everyone's like, "Oh no, did someone steal it?" Like, the guests are always trying to take the plane, so did someone actually succeed? And they found it, like, up on top of, like, this crevice of a wall and everything, and, like, so
Howie was protecting his
plane. But then I learned later in the book that Howie was a real person, and she was talking to one of the former nurses there, and she said, "So tell me about the man who jumped out of a window." And she said, "So tell me about the man who jumped out of a window." I said, "Some people call him Howie. I wasn't sure if it was in fact, if he was fact or fiction. It was said that the Fisher-Price airplane belonged to him. I don't think in life, but somehow in the afterlife. At least that was the rumor. He was real," she said, "but he wasn't in this building. He was in Quaker." Did he?
Oh, jeez.
Did he really jump out a window? Yes, she replied. Howie was incredibly strong. He could rip a mattress with his bare hands.
Wow.
So you don't take that plane.
Yes. Don't mess
But
with Howie.
I filtered this as we moved towards the bed. The beds were hard rubber. It was incredible that a man had such strength. Howie could bang on a screened window with his fist and pop it open. Then out the window he'd go.
So this was like a common occurrence for Howie,
sounds like
being
it.
able to just
Yeah.
pop that window out.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Oh, Howie. He should have just kept that plane 24/7. Don't take it away.
That's right.
Would you say he was a flight risk?
And they said
Flight horrible joke.
they said he
Don't
would
judge
also
me.
pull the lights
We
down.
are doing a really serious expose right now.
Yeah. They said he would also pull the lights down from the ceiling for heat.
For heat.
Yeah. the heat from the light bulb.
Interesting.
Do you mean as a spirit he would do this? Or
No,
No,
as
alive.
the actual
Dude.
patient.
Oh my god.
Yeah,
It was that cold in there then.
I guess so.
Or the bulbs were
Wow.
that hot. I mean, it was back in the day when you didn't
Well,
have.
yeah.
Well, yeah, you would have had. Well,
But you
at
wouldn't
that
really
time,
need
it
to
was-
not
pull the
into
lights down
wiring,
unless
it
it's
was-
that
yeah.
bad.
Yeah, it was still the classic Edison bulbs.
Yeah.
So those
The
things are meant to.
incandescent,
Yeah.
yeah.
They're meant to burn forever, and they
Yes.
got hot.
Sometimes I mean, I'm going off on a tangent, but sometimes I think about like theater back in the day. I mean, it must have been
Ooh.
so hot on stage.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
I can attest right now. With the current light situation,
Still hot.
it's ridiculously hot, and those are
And you're-
LEDs,
yeah.
most of them.
Oh, I misread.
Yeah.
Oh,
He would just pull them down.
he would
Oh.
just pull them down.
They had
Okay.
little half walls that were for heat. But
Oh,
I was
okay.
gonna say like
Yeah.
it's that bad.
Never mind.
None of my research
Yeah,
was
I was
cold.
gonna say, was it really that
You know
cold?
what?
Nope.
Nevertheless, stages back then were still hot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
back to the important part here. Stages.
I know. Like,
How about when they
whole
used fire for their lights because light
Oh,
bulbs
I
didn't
know.
exist? That's scary.
Oh well, that's where you get the old limelight from.
Uh-huh.
I guess, but still
It was
scary.
They dropped the
diffuse.
chandelier and the Phantom came.
I've
speaking of
seen that.
In the guise of the Mask of the Red Death.
Uh-huh.
So we have now gone into a whole different podcast.
I
Yep.
appreciate all of this, though. By the way, we got some Poe, we got some good French going on here.
Oh no, that was all in
Musical theater.
That was all in the story of the Phantom.
Oh, I know. It's fantastic in the original French too. Just saying. All right, any more ghost stories?
So I don't really have a ghost story, but I do have a question I'd like to pose to everyone. And my question is, do we think that perhaps this was such a place of suffering that maybe it wasn't even so much obviously it had a negative energy, but in the years since, of course, it's been like graffiti central, people will break in all the time and have for years. It was abandoned and all of that. There's clearly all kinds of satanic images and things like that. I'm sure people have gone in there with Ouija boards and held
100%.
seances. Yeah.
Like
There
some
are
sort of-
pentagrams painted on the walls.
Right. So my question is, do we think that because of maybe that additional activity, that's like either opened a portal and it's made things worse, it's focused
been
the
like
negative
a
energy.
locus for nasty stuff.
Right.
You know,
yeah.
I honestly think it's just bad.
Yeah.
And people who are drawing like the satanic symbols, they don't, like Kyle mentioned, they don't know what they're doing. They're just doing
Right.
it because it's part of like a group kind of thing.
But as we've said, that doesn't mean that it
Doesn't mean-
doesn't
yes.
Right.
have consequences.
But when
Yeah.
it comes to that,
Yes.
whether excuse me, whether you whatever religion you prescribe to, when it comes right down to it, if you believe in these symbols or don't believe in these symbols, which for me, I'm very much on the like, even if you don't believe in ghosts or anything, you have to believe that there's some kind of residual energy that's still left. Negative energy that's still going to leave a huge impact.
Mhm.
And a lot of the one theory that I had heard a while ago, which I think is probably the most apt way to describe a ghost sighting, is maybe it's not a spirit, maybe it's not an apparition, maybe it's just you are seeing the effects of something that happened long ago, that just the energy was so deep rooted there that it's just going to continue to come back and forth. You're just going to see it again and again and again. And I feel that if you're going to disprove everything at Pennhurst, you can't deny the fact that there's a lot of negative stuff that's going on there that's never going to leave. Whether it manifests itself in this or just everything that we know through the history, it's always going to be there. If it's not going to be a physical haunting, it is going to be a haunting on that building and in the history books forever.
So you think mostly like residual.
I think residual. So I don't think satanic or anything like that has anything to do with this. I think it's just a place of such pain and suffering that's going to be associated with this place forever.
You mean kind of like Gettysburg? Would
Yeah.
You say?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, definitely.
No, that I could buy that. I think the thing that makes me wonder about it are things like the shadow people, because those,
The ones that interact.
We may
Right.
have lived with some shadow people in this house.
right.
so.
I mean, and they're typically not just spirits, according to
Yeah.
what we kind of understand or think we understand. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it all depends on what they're doing. Like the sounds of moaning in the distance are probably residual. but then the person giving people injections in the hallway, or Mary getting angry at someone for claiming
Right.
she's not their friend, like that is something else. That's whatever it is, it's not a residual haunt at that point, because it's interacting, it's
Right.
understanding what's
It's very
going on.
intelligent.
Yeah, it's present.
Yeah.
It's present.
There you
I
go.
don't know if anybody heard me.
I
was
heard
leaning.
you.
Ah!
I was leaning.
All the way from the back of the class.
I have a question.
He speaks.
But,
Well, I think there's no question in my mind that this place is haunted. Like I don't know about you guys, but like I'm just gonna start off by saying I think this place is haunted, and I think that all the stuff that happened here has just made it a place that is just going to suck in more negative energy. So whether those shadow people are people who lived there before and are ghosts, or if it has attracted like something demonic, I wouldn't be surprised if it did. Right?
Right, and like I said, I don't prescribe to that. I don't think there's anything demonic about the place. I think that what's there is there. What's buried there is what's going to stay there forever.
I guess you made the case too that the some of the people who worked there were demonic and horrible. So maybe in the afterlife they look that way. Maybe they've lost their identity because they were horrible. I hate to make that
Maybe.
assumption, but
I mean, it's possible. It's absolutely possible.
we don't know anything about death. We haven't been there, knock on wood. What do you think, Gray?
I could buy that actually, and I think that negative essence is just kind of like what permeates the premises. Huh. So much to think about.
Would you buy that for $1?
If there's a return policy, maybe.
That dollar, he'll take you places.
I don't know. Do you take cash?
I'm just hoping that reference did not get lost on you guys. Come on, RoboCop.
Oh no, we got it.
Okay, good.
It's been a while since I've seen
A
RoboCop.
long while.
All right, because PJ just kind of gave me that, like, huh?
We just want to stare at you because we can. All right. Anyway, Laura,
Thanks.
what are your thoughts?
I tend to, I don't know. I do tend to think that the people playing around like with Ouija boards and seances and things like that can very much unknowingly open gateways, and it could be letting more things in than that were already there. Than what was already there. They may not be taking it home with them. They might just be opening that door, and whatever is walking through is still hanging out there. I think it's possible.
I mean, it could be all of the above.
Yeah, all the above.
I'm not really ruling any of that out. Some of it could be residual. Some of it could be, those
Intelligent.
I was gonna say that the horrible employees that were just there.
Right.
Maybe those are because they didn't die there, right?
No.
So maybe their
I hope
essence.
they don't.
Well, I mean,
I don't
all
know.
I'm saying is their essence could still.
Right.
Do you ever feel like when something bad has happened, even I'm trying to think of something that doesn't sound so like if there's been a spat at home or something like that, do you ever feel like there's something negative in the air or whatever?
Mhm. Oh yeah.
Or am I just being I'm not just being crazy, right? Like something and it's not anything to this magnitude, but there's something, sad or something
even
not kind that maybe happened.
Even when we went to Gettysburg, every time we go to Gettysburg,
Yeah.
and especially when we visit Devil's Den,
Uh-huh.
Oh,
that
you
area,
feel it.
it's the air is heavy. It has a really weird vibe.
It's oppressive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good word for it.
And when you leave out of there, you can breathe again. I'm not sure about you guys, but I feel like I can't breathe. It feels like I'm being smothered in there.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to laugh at you, Laura. I was just thinking I was just thinking of someone coming in. Hey guys, can I hang out here with you guys? Can
Someone open the Ouija board.
We can cause some mischief, right? Yeah, no. I'll just hang out in the back.
I got boogers. Oh
But
wait,
sometimes you can just tell, or even
I
if
has
people-
boogers. Sorry.
Even if people are in the room, let's just say, there are two people in the room, and there's something about maybe they could say nothing when you arrive, but there is something about the body language. There's something in
yeah.
the air that makes you think.
What's your fight or flight response
And then-
responding to
Right,
that
right,
that
right.
nonverbal?
Mhm.
Yep.
So it could be just. I'm going with. I've changed my verdict. I'm thinking D, all of the above.
I think it's all the
Just
above. Yeah. PJ.
Yeah, I definitely think there's something going on in this place, and I'm glad there's a museum portion of it. I just wish there was more emphasis on that compared to everything else that's going
Yeah.
on.
I made sure to do research for that just because I had mentioned, like, I don't like the idea of the haunted house attraction. It really just hurts my soul to think about that going on. So I came with all the information that I could garner for tonight, which nothing points to like one answer here. So before I even begin reading, who here thinks that the haunted asylum like attraction should be allowed? Like, I no way am I going to be offended. Who's okay with that?
Half and half on me.
Yeah.
Where at one point, for one thing, it's like, yeah, because it helps get the word out about the place, and then there's like, oh, that's not really cool.
It's not a kosher way to
and
do
if
it.
if you're a horror fan, what better place?
Right.
You know, like there is that side of it.
Like, I am a fan of horror, but at the same time, he's like, yeah, that just
Let's
doesn't
not.
feel good.
I'm not saying
Yeah.
that something can't happen. I think it all has to do with the delivery. Do you remember when we went to Savannah, right back 1,000 years ago, and we had that one, and ever since her, nobody really compares to that ghost tour.
She was
and
amazing.
Just the way that she delivered, it was just so matter of fact. She didn't rely on anything kitschy. She didn't rely on anything campy.
It was all very
no
historical. It felt very historical.
Very matter of fact,
And it was
just
middle of the
very
night,
truthful.
which I thought fit the ambience.
Yeah, and that's okay too.
But
you
she
know
wasn't
what I mean?
dressed up in an attire.
She didn't put on a character.
Right, no, I wasn't here for this, but from what PJ has told me, that's just the history taking care of itself. That's the history speaking for itself.
Yeah,
And I don't understand.
and that's all you should need.
Right. I think that's the point that I was looking to make too. Like, you don't need any of that. You can just kind of let it,
Speak for itself.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, I did lots of research because I want to do this justifiably where I'm showing both sides. Because I know that I have a bias towards the idea of not running the haunted house. So I didn't want to be the person, no, you guys, terrible thing to do here.
Well, I am a terrible person, so we're okay with that.
This isn't about you though, Dan. This is about, no. Anyway, so the most recent article that I could find was actually from June of 2022. And the title of it from History at Work is called Who Should Tell the Story? The Pennhurst Haunted Asylum and the Pennhurst Museum in Public History. And so it goes over, like I had looked up timelines too. Like we know that this place was bought out. Sections of it has been bought because of monetary issues. So the Pennhurst Haunted Asylum and the Pennhurst Museum, operated by Pennhurst LLC in collaboration with the Pennhurst Memorial and Preservation Alliance, also called PMPA, exist side by side on the grounds of the shuttered Pennhurst State School and Hospital in Spring City, Pennsylvania. The sites might seem to have opposite goals, one to frighten and one to entertain, the other to educate about past wrongs. Over the last decade, however, the haunted attraction and the Pennhurst Museum have become aligned in unexpected ways. New questions are being posed. Who should tell the story of Pennhurst and how should they tell it? So we are into the background of Pennhurst, what happened. And as I had mentioned to you, it was bought in 2008. A private development company called Pennhurst LLC purchased the major sites, and they wanted to use it for the haunted asylum. They got a lot of flack for it, but in 2010 they actually began doing their haunted house. Now, fun fact, PMPA did try to use legal efforts to stop the haunted house from happening, but they lost because it's a private property now, right? But yeah, in 2010 the attraction grossed over $2 million, and it makes $2 million at least per year. Just so you know. Now, the first year that they did the haunted asylum, it was as bad as you could imagine. So here's a fun fact of what it looked like. A fictional Dr. Chakikajan, I'm going to guess that's how you pronounce his last name, and his minions were shown experimenting on asylum inmates. In a minor nod to the history of Pennhurst, patrons were able to view artifacts retrieved from the property, including the dentist chair and electroshock therapy machines. So that is what they did the first year. Obviously, that's very offensive. Yeah, okay.
Yep, a little bit.
Yeah.
Just a tad.
So since then, the Pennhurst LLC changed in ownership in 2017. And when that happened, the person who bought it out wanted to be more proactive with establishing and kind of maintaining the history of Pennhurst, which I do appreciate. because the new owner and general manager have personal connections to the disability community. So, and it does say here too, aware of the unintended consequences of a conflated story, they changed features of the attraction and empowered a group of disabled performers with creative control. This new haunted attraction deserves a second look. And so what has happened since 2017 is the disabled now are acting in this actively, which that's nice. But I still think we mentioned like last time, the idea of like a circus sideshows,
Yeah.
Are you really presenting history and making a great comment on what we could do? And so you're showing the past, but like, don't let it happen again. I'm all about that. Like, again, we need to be proactive. But what are you actually showing then? And so the article then, if I flip forward, does go on, and you see one of the major actresses here, she has a disability where her joints are very movable. So she can do all like the kind of cool contortions, right? And so she really enjoys acting there. And she said to me, being on the site and performing and building a community as we have has given the disabled population here the power back. We have reclaimed the space and seek to perform, educate, and welcome others into it. And so I don't want to say that it's inappropriate because obviously she feels empowered to do it. But again, like it really, to me, it still bothers me that you're doing it on a site where people died. You don't see Hillview Manor doing haunted tours or doing like a haunted, like, mansion kind of thing at night. I'm glad they're doing the historical walkthroughs in the daytime, but you could do that at nighttime as well and not have all the kitschy stuff.
They said that they have ties to the community. Do you know like where the proceeds, if any of the proceeds go to?
No, they just have ties in that either they are disabled or they have friends who are disabled. And so they wanted to make it a little more historical and not so, 2010 embarrassing.
Right. Do you know what they do with is the proceeds strictly for profit?
It
does
says
any
it
of it
grosses $2 million per year. I could not find anything where the money was going back to anyone else.
Because I don't know if that fully excuses it. I think that would make it a little more palatable.
Yeah. I know that it does say here that the Pennhurst Museum was moved from the attraction space into a separate building. And then in 2020, PMPA did establish the Pennhurst Memorial Fellowship to invite people back to kind of help find ways to make this place historical and keep it from crumbling.
But those are
much.
separate entities, right?
But they're separate entities. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know if Pennhurst Memorial and Preservation Alliance has made a comment on the LLC?
So they actually have. I have it. But just, you mentioned the museum, PJ. It's actually in the Mayflower building.
Yeah.
Yeah, just so you know, like that museum is very tiny.
Yeah,
fun
I know.
fact.
But
Yeah,
it's
only in the first floor. And...
yeah. So
museums, dedicated to disability history, their history of the disabled, right?
So yeah, all I have is this is off of the Preserve Pennhurst website. It says, a statement regarding the Pennhurst Haunted Asylum. PMPA is completely opposed to the operation of a haunted attraction at Pennhurst that portrays people with disabilities in a demeaning and degrading fashion. Demonizing people with disabilities is a profit-making entertainment and is and should be offensive to everyone. We urge everyone who shares our disgust to speak out against the haunted asylum and boycott this travesty. They also have a petition you can sign. So that's on their website. I wasn't sure if that was like old because in 2020 they started kind of working together with that fellowship. However, there are comments on here that are as recent as 11/8/2022, so just a couple months ago. But someone here named Lisa Ray said, and this is in the comments, in 1979, I spent a weekend at Pennhurst painting walls in different rooms and trying to add brightness to this horrid place. I saw things there that a haunted house should never duplicate and could never duplicate. All funds raised on these tours should be donated to Americans with Disabilities for Care. God help them. And then another person named Sean Dolan said, I was a patient at Eastern State School and Hospital, a similar place located in Trevose, PA. If all proceeds do not go to the people who languished here, then it ought to be closed permanently. They won't let the anguished energies there exist there rest. Let me know how I can be of any help.
And there's a website here called escapeauthority.com, and they reviewed the haunted house because, apparently that's what they do. Mm-hmm. And so I scrolled down to the scares section, and this is what they say about that. So, because they love it, because, they're not really aware of the history of Pennhurst by the looks of it. They're just reviewing it as a haunted house. And so they say, let's start with the statement that in any other haunt review, this would absolutely be a negative, but not here. The actors throughout the asylum really don't try to scare you. They're not, quote, monsters. They're mental patients. And they absolutely inhabit their roles so well that at times you might find yourself wondering if they're acting at all. Pennhurst Asylum is overflowing with the criminally insane, and naturally they're all loose. But rather than jumping out and yelling boo, like a cliche haunt, every single one of these deranged inmates are fully in character. You may find one walking in circles, muttering to herself, or another quite literally talking to a wall. Some just stare at you. Some follow you, and yes, actively grab you. There's no longer any rules in this asylum, so consider your safety bubble of, well, they can't touch me, officially popped.
Oh, yikes.
And so I guess like that fits into the idea of the uncanny valley, where you feel uncomfortable because you're not used to that kind of situation. So if someone's walking in circles and muttering, that would be freaky to
and
most
it does put you back into the time of what it would have been like there. You know, like why camera crew kept quitting when filming the expose and everything.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's, again, I said this in the last episode too, it's bringing back that cliche that, like, insane asylums are, you know, places for, as they put it, deranged inmates and things like that.
Right.
And it's putting this horrible negative connotation on everything, where it should have been just a place to help people. Mm-hmm. And it just, you know, it's twisted.
Well, I think that ultimately it should have been a place to help people, but it wasn't.
It wasn't.
And most places like that weren't. And, you know, even, you know, in the book that I read, The 10 Days in a Madhouse from Nellie Bly, she talks about how people went in there sane and within a few months were broken by the conditions.
Yeah.
And, you know, that is, I think, the really heartbreaking thing is that, you know, these sane people would go in and become deranged. And so maybe that's where some of that is, like, kind of worth preserving, that, like, even us as tourists, we go in for entertainment and we get so uncomfortable after just an hour or whatever. Imagine being there for a week, a month, a year.
Right.
That's what's scary.
It truly is a shock to your system.
Yeah.
And to kind of add to that too, like, because I have a different article here that talks about the 3 major attractions right now. So Matt Herzog is the current, like, owner, and he said that he says about the attractions, the history and the experiences that visitors have reported during tours of property. We offer 3 haunted houses. There's the Pennhurst Asylum, the morgue, and the tunnels. And so those are the 3 things that they kind of go over. And so he said, our haunted attraction is known as one of the best in the United States, utilizing some of the best props, sets, and actors available. We host an asylum attraction in which the patients have overrun the facility meant to contain them and have turned the tables on the guests, their new inmates. The morgue is within the basement of the asylum, utilizing experimental techniques for the preservation and reanimation of corpses. So I'm sorry, right there, they were not reanimating. I hope they weren't reanimating the dead in the morgues. So that's already kitschy.
Oh, there's lots of kitschiness. Like, there's a picture of people in giant tubes and things like that.
And then it says the tunnels are where the most dangerous experiments are kept. As guests enter, it is clear that a security breach has occurred, and now the monsters are set free. Guests walk through over 1,500 feet of real tunnels, evading these monsters. So I don't really care how they paint it. It's definitely a haunted house attraction. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I agree. I mean, I guess where I feel a little, like, on both sides of the issue is, if this weren't at that location, no one would have a problem with what was happening. You know? I mean, and I get that the location could mean that it's sort of in, like, bad taste. But if this were, you know...
Are you trying to say, like, if they did a Pennhurst, like, haunted house, like, in Philadelphia or something like that?
Or
in a barn or in Wilkes-Barre or
some
something
random
like
location.
That would be...
Yeah,
it's all about the context.
If you're gonna have, like, a creepy morgue where someone's like being a Frankenstein, I'm okay with that.
Because, like,
but you're not gonna do that on Auschwitz. You're not gonna do that, like, you know, in the buildings of Auschwitz. You're not gonna do that.
Or you couldn't do it, like, I wouldn't be comfortable attending something like that, like, say in Baltimore or whatever, and calling it like a haunted concentration camp. That would be offensive just by nature of what you're tying it to.
I
right?
think that where I'm just a little hung up on it. I mean, I do think it's in bad taste. I do. But I read something quite a while back that kind of made me rethink like horror movies, for example. And so you talk about like, historically, people went to hangings and burnings of witches, and even like further back, like the gladiators.
Macabre,
yeah. And people being eaten alive by lions and like all of these
and
things
bears
for entertainment.
Bears to hurt them, yeah.
And, but now we just have manufactured entertainment. It's fake blood, but we're still getting that same.
You're still getting the kick of dopamine.
Yes.
And it's all about getting essentially
safely
you're
scared.
A visceral reaction.
Right.
Yes.
You're getting that primal urge to see that kind of stuff.
Right.
That we aren't.
Yeah.
In our natural habitat today aren't getting or aren't seeing.
And so I guess like I think where I'm having a little bit of like, I just don't know is like, yeah, I think that this is in bad taste, but I've been to other haunted houses, and like I haven't thought they were in bad taste. And
I've never been to a haunted house though where people are pretending to be insane and talking to walls and walking in circles and acting like they are like autistic, for example. I see that every day at my job. We have we have many autistic students, and they'll walk in circles and they'll start pacing in the middle of the class. They'll just get up and start moving in your classroom because they need to. I see kids stimming all the time in my classroom. So like for me, I see it every day, but I don't see it at haunted house attractions. I'm going to see Frankenstein reanimating corpses. I'm going to see that, the monster.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've seen things, maybe not like that specific and that like one after another, but definitely people acting like off kilter.
Oh, yeah.
And in such a way that, but like if they were out in everyday life, it wouldn't be, you'd be like, oh, well, they may have an issue, but you wouldn't think much of it. But in the context of a haunted house, it's, elevated and it's scary.
Right.
But I think you're right. I think like I would be more okay if they were going to do a haunted house anywhere else, but not here. Like the untold stories that we didn't get in the civil action lawsuit, the real stories we saw in Pennhurst, the amount of rape that was happening, all the abuse, like it is not
the filth.
Yeah,
the filth of the place.
It is
we didn't even
not
touch.
okay to gross $2 million plus a year on the backs of something that was so, to me, atrocious. We need to learn from the experience, not poke a finger at it and like joke about it.
Yeah.
I guess the other question is though, really, I mean, the grounds at Auschwitz, for example, are still maintained. People visit. It's holy, sacred ground, really. I suspect that without this attraction, this would just crumble.
It already has been. They've actually demolished a whole bunch of the buildings. They are getting rid of it, except the attractions that they want.
And I guess that ultimately leads back to your question then. Is it worth this level of theater, despite the pain that these thousands of people endured
and you think
in
if
order to keep it
if they're making millions
preserved.
of dollars, why don't they preserve the place? No, they're demolishing building after building. Like they really are.
Well, I mean, I don't know, but maybe in their defense, those buildings are not salvageable.
And I will say, actually,
but they've owned it since 2010. They're probably more salvageable,
Yeah, probably.
a decade ago.
True, but I will say $2 million a year for that age of buildings plus the acreage and the tunnels is not a lot.
That's not
actually.
a lot.
And
so
they
this
are
is just-
excavating the tunnels at the moment, too.
This is just a comment that is off of that website, so Who Shall Tell a Story. And this is a comment from August 8, 2022. According to East Vincent Township's website, Pennhurst Development LLC is planning to demolish all of Pennhurst's old buildings and flood the land with parking spaces and warehouses, data centers, which means nothing will be left to remember the many individuals whose lives were spent in agony there. So I'm not sure if that's true. I'd have to go on do more research, but I did circle that because this person seems that didn't.
All of Pennhurst buildings?
No, it says all the older buildings.
The older buildings.
So my guess is they're going to keep the Mayflower because that's a moneymaker. They're going to keep the administration building and the tunnels because it's a moneymaker. But that's all they're going to use.
Quaker, they'll keep Quaker.
So, I mean, that would take more research that I don't have time to do live on a podcast.
Well, if they do that, then God help whatever business and warehouses roll in, because they are not going to get a whole lot done.
Yeah. So in any case, though, I know everyone has their own opinions, and I appreciate having all the opinions there. I just hope that all of this has taught us to be more proactive and not wait for an expose.
From the Inquirer. Oh, this is from
You
2017.
can, and I can't click it open.
No.
I had to pay for it, so it stops me
Yeah,
from
it's
reading.
from 2017, but yeah, the first couple lines is that $4 million state grant, $6 million loan will be used to prepare some of the 23 buildings while others will be demolished.
So I just, again, that would take more research. Maybe they're keeping it hush-hush because a lot of this is hush-hush because it's a moneymaker for them. I know that PMPA, their fellowship, they have people come in there to actually go into these older crumbling buildings and find artifacts to put away before the buildings are completely demolished. So it's not an Auschwitz. We're not keeping it to preserve it to showcase what needs to be, what should not happen in the future. It's the exact opposite. We're letting it rot away and make
the tragedy in a lot of ways too.
Right, and you also don't have an entire nation behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, at least they admit that there was a lot of stuff wrong.
Right.
There's no denying the Holocaust in Germany.
And we're also looking at a country that still is one of the lowest when it comes to mental health. So, yeah, sure, we finally started to acknowledge it, but we're not really going to do much more on it.
Well, in any case, I want to thank you guys for coming on here because I really do appreciate all of your honest opinions. I think we did a great job discussing this. Anything else we want to add before we're done for the evening?
No, thanks for having us. It was I think it's an
covered
important
a lot of
topic.
ground.
Yeah.
Mhm, yeah.
I do want to end with one last comment, though. It's from, I want to say this is from the, not Preserve, but it's from the Pennhurst Asylum Civil War Ghosts. It's just a beautiful paragraph I wanted to end with. Pennhurst sits as a part haunted attraction, part memorial to the dead. It is hoped that we do not forget what happened here, as it is necessary to remember mistakes of the past to prevent them from happening in the future. And then coupled with that is a quote that you have, Laura, from Nellie Bly. And I think that they show the dichotomy of human nature. So you go ahead and read yours.
It is only after one is in trouble that one realizes how little sympathy and kindness there are in the world.
So I just feel like we need to end there. You can make a better place and fix the problems in the past, or you can ignore it. Right. Sorry to bring down the house there the wrong way, but thank you for joining us and have a lovely evening.